All right, the time is now 6:15. This is, I believe, the 18th meeting of the Ordinance Review Committee, and more importantly, it's the second public forum that we've had. The first public forum we had a couple of months ago, and it was really for more brainstorming and discussion of what's gone on. This is more hopefully focused on some proposals that we've been talking about and that we wanted to get public input on. Let's begin by introducing ourselves. My name is Mark Chapdelaine. I've been the chairperson of this committee, and if we start down with Bob, we can work the line.
Sure. Bob Carroll, chair of the planning board and a member of this committee from the start. Thanks.
Todd Sacco, former school committee member, average everyday Joe Hanlon.
Joe Hanlon, also a member of the Citizens Finance Committee and the Finance Commission.
Kurt Millar, I'm on the Board of License and been on this committee since the beginning also.
Tom Chedina, member of the Board of Appeals.
Denise Quist, town clerk.
Cameron Chavez, too many committees to mention.
Significant finance background, career in health care, and a valued member of this committee.
Thank you.
Right, moving right along. So again, the purpose of this second forum is to hopefully get some public input upon these proposals that have been on the agenda. Hopefully everyone has had a chance prior to tonight to receive and review some of these proposals that were on the agenda that was posted. And we're really looking for the opportunity to hear from the public about these. Just to put it in perspective of what we've done, pursuant to the charter every 5 years, the town is to review the charter and to create a committee like this one, the Ordinance Review Committee, the charter, and recommend changes to the town council. Starting sometime in March, this committee began meeting on a weekly basis, and we've taken the painstaking act of going through section by section, page by page, our town charter. We met weekly, we discussed it, we've discussed many of these issues to the point where we know them a lot. We know what the charter says, we know where it refers in other parts of the charter, and I do have the feeling that at this point in time, this committee does have a very strong handle on our charter. Typically, the charter review process takes a year and a half. Because of COVID, the 2020 rendition of the Charter Commission did not complete their work, and as a result, TCP Lettieri had requested and was granted a legal opinion that he could have essentially a second run at the charter review, and was informed that he had 6 months to get it done. So we began in March. We've got to be done by September. Our goal is to be done next week. By meeting weekly, we've been able to expedite the process, and we've been able to kind of get a better handle quicker. Throughout this process, the charter does require that we have one public forum such as this. We thought it was best to have a second public forum so that we could get specific information about these exact proposals. Couple rules of the road. I know a lot of people are going to want to be heard on Zoom, and we've got a full room by this committee standards. And we've got a time clock here, and we've agreed that we're going to try to limit comments to 4 minutes. I know it's difficult sometimes to limit yourself to 4 minutes, but I think it's important in so much that we're able to hear from everybody and get through all of these proposals at a reasonable hour. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Stephen Ruggiero. I sit on the Charter and Ordinance Review Committee. I am the Town Council Vice President, and I represent Precinct 6. And I'm happy to be here, and thank you all for coming.
Wonderful. Moving right along. Proposal number 1. So I ask when somebody wants to be heard, simply raise your hand on Zoom, and Denise will deal with the Zoom. We'll deal with the people in person first, and then we'll switch over to the Zoom folks. And we ask that you state your name and your address so that we can keep a record of this. Secretary Bob Carroll is doing the best he can to take down as much information and give us the best notes possible. The goal here is for us to have the public's input prior to next week when we vote on proposals that are either in here or like this. We based on the information that comes out tonight, the committee very well may tweak these and try to make these proposals fit more on what we're hearing about tonight and how to do it best. So without further ado, why don't we begin with Proposal 1, which is...
Can we add just a little piece to that too?
Sure.
Is what happens next is that, do you want to
Sure.
explain that? So we make the recommendations. and
my
sometimes
apologies.
it gets voted, just
So we will we will vote next week on the 20th, likely vote on the 20th, and our report would then be signed and sent to the town council. Proposals that are deemed substantial or substantive, those would require a vote of the town. The council would vote to send it to an election. Areas that are more on a rules and ordinance or that legal opinions come back as non-substantive would be voted simply by the town council as an ordinance and could be voted into law at their next meeting. The charter does require that the town council take up our proposals and our suggestions as a first order of business at the next meeting that they receive this. So it is something that is going to kind of move forward in a deliberate fashion. I did talk to the town council president earlier today, and he informed us that he would like to, if there is anything that needs to go to an election, include it in the special election that's scheduled for March. That's not certainly etched in stone yet, but it's something that is being talked about to try to move this along if necessary. Sum it up? Excellent.
I have a question.
Sure.
May I speak?
Sure.
My name is Jean Maggio. I'm from Precinct 4. I was a former counselor on the original council way back. And I want to apologize because I missed this entire thing. When Jeff Turco was assigned to do a charter review, he started to call the former counselors, and then he got into the election and the whole thing stopped. After that, I don't do Zoom, and I actually didn't pay attention. It's my fault. I didn't realize that all these meetings were going on. And I praise all of you because I know what it is to have to go to meetings and to work things out. With that being said, I thought tonight was going to be a continuation of a public hearing for people to offer suggestions. I don't know if that's in the process or not. I see that you've already written out some proposals that you're going to talk about tonight, which is great. I took the time to type up mine. I'll hand them out whether you want to look at them or not.
So if I could interrupt you, so the plan is to go through these proposals and then at the end go into more of a public comment, and if there's any new issues that need to be brought up, great. We can certainly discuss them, and we're open to adding new proposals. By no means are we, closed or set on these specific proposals, but I think we're at a point in time where we want to get feedback first and foremost on the proposals that we've been kind of considering and volleying back and forth, and then if there is anything that isn't addressed, by all means, there'll be an opportunity in the public comment. And I do think on that same note, it is important to say, I know a lot of people are on vacation this week. We are going to be live on WCAT tonight, and the recording will be replayed and uploaded this week. We'll be meeting again on the 20th next week, and we're going to open that meeting. Before anything, we'll start with public comment. So we'll be able to have a continuation of public comment. If there is something that somebody sees that they want to be heard on, we can certainly do that.
Thank you for explaining that. I
Sure.
appreciate it. Thank you.
One question. Are we going to be able to comment per proposal?
Yes,
You're going to read a proposal and then you're going to have public comment at each.
yes. The goal is to get as much public input directly to what we're talking about here. This way, we're not all jumping all over the place. And you can certainly speak more than once if you want to speak on multiple proposals, by all means. All right, so proposal number one is changes to the size and term length of the town council. So the proposal that's being discussed is currently we have a town council that consists of a town council president with a 2-year term, 2 at-large councilors with 4-year terms, and 6 precinct councilors also with 4-year terms. The concern that we were faced with and the problem that we're trying to cure is the fact that there's a low interest, a low interest in running for public office in this town. And how do we do that? How do we encourage others to run and to make it so that we're getting the best possible people running for these positions, because they are vital to our town and important work gets done. One way that was being considered would be to shrink the overall size so that the pool wouldn't need to be so deep. We could shrink the size, but by shrinking, which would be as we're discussing now, the reduction or the elimination of at-large seats. That being said, we could accomplish the same goal by taking the precincts and combining them and maybe having 3 district councilors and then having at-large members still. So I know there's a lot of people that feel strongly one way or the other about whether at-large councilors are vital and whether it's in the town's best interest to make this change. The other area of this same proposal deals with the term length. So what we see right now, we've heard from several past town council presidents, and I see some of them on the Zoom, glad to see. 4 years is a long, is really what's needed to accomplish any policy goals. 2 years is just simply not enough time. A town council president gets in, they work very hard in a very contested election many times to get into office, and before they really get entrenched in there, they're ready to run for re-election and policy initiatives aren't getting completed. Something like the middle school is dragging on into a decade, and would it be possible that if a town council president had a longer term, more could get done? So that was really the thought process behind that. Now, one thing that we did all kind of agree is that 3 years would be ideal, 3-year terms. Unfortunately, 3-year terms are not ideal because Winthrop technically is a city. City elections happen on odd years, and town elections like ours, the town elections would be on even years. So what towns can do that we cannot do is have annual April elections, town elections. Because we're technically a city, we cannot have that spring election without it being a special election. That's the understanding what I've been told. Whether it's correct or incorrect, that's what my understanding is of why we can't have that 3-year term, which would make probably the most sense. That being said, I'm hoping to get some comments, the board's hoping to get comments here on several issues. The one is, the elimination of the at-large seats. The second would be whether or not we should go to just a purely precinct system where every neighborhood would be represented. Every neighborhood would have somebody that they could look to that would hopefully be representing their interests on the town council. By shrinking the overall size of the town council, a con is certainly that these councils are already overworked enough. You're now adding more to their plate in theory. The other side of it is, though, if we can make the transition going forward that possibly pay becomes part of the incentive of somebody running for one of these offices, the less we have for councilors, the less money it would cost to do so. So that is kind of some of the brainstorming that went back and forth. Some areas, Lowell in particular, they went to an all at-large system, and ultimately a lawsuit was filed, and it was determined that all at-large is not representative of a community. Now, Winthrop is a very unique community. We are very small in geography, we're dense, And, you know, for one counselor to be representing the people on the point, there's, neighbors are also up in the Highlands. And it's one neighborhood in many respects, so that's kind of where we've been jumping around on that. I'm gonna open it up to the committee first. Does anyone have any comments that they'd like to begin with on this proposal?
Yeah, I would just like to encourage the folks on the Zoom and here to consider too, if you're thinking about, you know, the length of the term, you know, one thing we talked about with the 2-year term was, and I'm sure some of our newer elected officials may have something to say about this, there's a lot of deterrence in 4-year commitment. So when you tie that with usually the person running for town council president's motivated, with, you got a lot of people kind of on the fence thinking about what do they want to run for town council or not. 4 years is a big commitment. And also the fact that, you know, you get school committee members that are doing 4 years, we should probably look at that too, right? Make that 2 years if we did look at that anyway. Point being, we think it's a good attractant to get people to try it out. We'd ask you to think about that too and provide some of your thoughts on that aspect of it. Thank you.
And also the committee want to be heard prior to the start of the public comment on this? And then I'm gonna ask the committee members, you know, if there's a follow-up question of someone's comment, by all means, let's ask it and let's do all we can to get as much information as possible.
I have a quick thing too.
Sure.
I was able to sit on the last committee with Mr. Turkle also, and there was discussion of actually expanding the council, and it kind of quickly got dispersed. So we have thought about size, keeping it the same, shrinking it down, and yes, we all agreed on what's in this proposal, but just so there's awareness that there has been more discussion of increasing, also shrinking it down, all the changes that could potentially happen, and it wasn't just a 5-minute discussion. It's gone back and forth a few times on where this proposal came up to. So I think that's important to hear, that even the previous committee discussed this same thing.
Excellent.
So just, you mentioned the compensation, and I think it's important to point out to the public how little that is in comparison to the amount of time these people put in. When you compare it to other communities our size, it's almost embarrassing what we pay the people to run our community, to run our government. I don't know if that would be an incentive enough for people to get more interested, but to me, that's a huge deterrent, or not deterrent, but a huge factor also, that there's so little compensation.
Denise and Karen, what's the total number right now of what the pay is?
The councilors get $2,600 and the council president gets $52.
Okay, so $5,200 for the
entire
council
year.
president per year, and $2,600 for each
I
council.
mean, you do the amount of hours, which I think, minimum, or they're not supposed to work more than, was it 19, or? And then they certainly work more than that, but just base it on that, and it's less than minimum wage. It's
Question the council president puts in
yeah.
a lot on it, and not just this one, all
This
of them.
discussion here is between you, but we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
We'll speak up.
We'll go louder.
All right, so why don't we begin with public comment? Would anyone in the audience like to be heard on this proposal? Yes?
My name is Suzanne Swab. I live at 3 Seal Harbor Road. And I went through this, and it's really more of a question. Now that I know we can't do 3 years, which is what my idea was, because I think that makes more sense. I think when people are in a new position, if they haven't been in other town councils, they have to learn something about the position. That almost takes a year. So now they're productive in the next year, but they're also now having to run again and spending time and money to run again. So that's why I thought that 3 years would work. I understand the issue of 4. I do think that's a long commitment, so I can appreciate that perspective too. So the only solution, idea that I came up with is, right now, they're staggered. Is that correct? In other
Yes.
words, you're not voting for a precinct one counselor at the same time. All of the precincts are not voting the same, so they are staggered.
Half the precincts and one at large is up every 2 years.
And I don't know if those that have served would be willing to mentor those next people for 2 months or something that come along, but it would be helpful for continuity purposes, because 2 years is just a very short time.
It is. Anyone else?
So for the 2-year terms, like Suzanne mentioned.
Yeah, I know, we all know you, but
Oh,
it's
sorry,
for the record.
Annabelle Chair, Precinct 3.
Thank you.
I don't think 2 years is long enough to learn the role and then apply it, especially if you think of it in terms of budget seasons. That's one budget season to learn the ropes and another to apply it. I just don't think you can be an effective counselor in 2 years. Also, that quick turnover, I think, would kind of stymie progress on a lot of goals, especially financial things that may take a few more years to really kind of take into effect. I understand the idea that 4 years is a long time commitment, but I think I would probably have been less likely to run for 2 because it doesn't feel like you can accomplish a whole lot in 2 years. So I think 4 makes a lot more sense.
Now, keep in mind, that's not a limit. So the term would be, what we're suggesting is a 2-year term, but you can serve for as many as you'd like, as long as your precinct is willing to continue to vote for you.
Right, I just don't know that in 2 years or in a year and a half really, when you start campaigning again, that you would have enough of a track record to show.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Do you think 4 years is, so you don't think 4 years is a deterrent at all for anybody to run? Or are you suggesting that perhaps, hey, if they can't take 4 years?
I mean, I'm sure it's a deterrent at some point, but I think there's a lot of different deterrents. You can't weed them all out. I don't think it's a primary one, and if it is, then I don't know, I just don't think that would be the biggest deterrent for people. And when you talk about the compensation and stuff, and I think unless you could make it take the place of like even a part-time job, which I don't think we can afford as a town, I don't know that a little bit more money would be enough of an incentive for people. I'm sure at some point it would be, but I don't know that we could financially offer enough to make it an incentive.
Okay. Yes.
Jean Maggio, Precinct 4. I thought to eliminate all precinct councils and to reduce the council to 4 with a president. And the reason I say that is a precinct, when I was a precinct counselor of 4, I never thought all I could work with was precinct 4. If people from other precincts came up to me, I was very willing to listen, to do, to whatever it was that any resident needed or wanted to talk about. As a counselor, I was available. I think by putting precinct in front of a name deters people from talking to you sometimes. I feel that if you opened it up, and plus the fact, today it's very difficult to get people to run for office. And I think if you opened it up without being a precinct, you might get more people to run. Now, it might be that 3 people from precinct 2 run, and people might say, oh, well, then only precinct 2 is gonna be, represented if we allow all those people to run from that. But I don't feel that will happen. Winthrop is a very unique town. And I think if you open it up so that anyone in any precinct can run for the office, you will get more people who will come out to vote. And that they'll be well represented. I also feel that in place of the precinct meetings where counselor had to go out, organize a precinct meeting for people, find a place to go, that before a council meeting, and I picked out the months of April, May, and June, the 2 meetings of each month, April meeting 1 would be precinct 1, and the second meeting, precinct 2. You would take a half hour of a meeting in the beginning to use as a precinct meeting. Now, you may not get anybody who shows up, you go on with the regular meeting, public comment, and you continue. But rather than send a counselor out to do another night of going out to a meeting, to do it here at a regular meeting. By reducing the amount of counselors, you're also gonna have more money available. And I think that will help you to raise the amount of salary that you can offer the people who run for office. Now, I'm sorry to hear about the 3 years. That 3 years we can't do, because I was of the same notion. I felt 2 years for a counselor, 3 years for a president, so you have that overflow so the president can guide the new counselors. But if we can't do 3, maybe by offering, if we can offer more money, maybe we will get people who will run for 4. It is a long-term commitment today for people, but if that's the only thing that we can do, then it has to be 4 years. And, but I also think somehow it's gotta be set so that the president doesn't leave, staggered, so that you always have people who have gone through the process to help the new people who come on board.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things we discussed shrinking. If we can do it legally without getting sued, I'm all for eliminating precinct councilors and just having at-larges. But committees, that seems to be a problem, having not served on the town council, but I understand there's a lot of committees and a lot of time. What is your opinion of that if we reduced it to all at-large and say, I don't know, 4 in the president or 6 in the president?
Well, when I was on the council, I created the Health and Safety Committee and the Committee on Committees, because we couldn't find another name for that committee. So, that's the name we picked.
That's when I gave up on it.
Well, again, I think depending on, I hate to always put it down to salary, because people don't serve just because of money. And I think especially in Winthrop, again, I have to go back. I love the residents of Winthrop. We're such serving people. And I feel that if they're on the council and they have to do more than 1 committee or 2 committees, they're gonna do it. And if they need help, they're gonna reach out, because there are people who will be willing to help if they needed the help. I was actually going to, because some of the boards that we have in town, I feel that the council also, I hate to put more work on you, but I feel that the council also should have representatives to different boards in the town, like the Board of Appeals, like the Board of Health, the Airport Hazards Committee, and bring that information and report it to the people when you have your meetings. So yes, that's even more work, which probably is the wrong time to bring that up. But, I don't know if I answered your question.
How do you feel about the 2 years? Do you think, there's a lot of carryover, there's a lot of incumbents that run and get reelected. It's not like every election, it's a complete changeover. Do you think the 2 years would have been, once you're a sitting councilor, well, it's only another 2 years, I'll run again, versus this is another 4 years, I'm not doing this again, but maybe in 2-year increments. Do you think there is any benefit to the 2?
Yes, absolutely. And I will tell you this, and I remember, I'm correct, when Jimmy became president, there was also, because there were some new people on the council, he also did, I'll call it training sessions, where you can have a few meetings where you sit down with the new members and you go over things so they understand some of the processes, they understand some of the committees or the things that are in process. And that way you can help them get a start. And the 2 years hopefully will encourage people. I really liked what I was doing. I really felt I helped. I'm gonna run again for 2 years. I really think that that's a good process.
Yes.
Just a point of clarification, you mean running your first time for 4 years and then a renewal for 2?
No, it would be 2 no matter what.
All the regular members would be 2, the president would be changed to 4.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm Ken Goodwin, 30 Towson Road, Precinct 2. I would just like to say, I think the most major fundamental problem in this town for its citizens is that any kind of change is painstakingly slow. The smallest thing that could be resolved, it just seems to most citizens that it is slow, and it's just, the citizens' view, the people that I talk to, it seems like the town is dysfunctional because we have so much overlap with these boards and these committees, and it's just painstakingly slow. I would be in favor of a two-term limit, an incentive for council, if anybody to run for public office as an incentive, some monetary compensation to stay in the game, and to see what that person can do in 2 years, and let the people in the precincts decide, you know what, I'm happy with the change, I see some change made, whatever it is, and they'll get reelected. But I don't think 4 years, I mean, if you stay on for 4 years, you're stuck with somebody for 4 years, and I don't see anything that's even noticeable that's changed in this town in 4 years, and like, it's just ridiculous. And I think it's just, it goes beyond the council, it goes to these boards and these committees, it just seems like there's so much overlap, and there's so much, there's just too much bureaucracy in all of it. It's like, it's causing the town from moving and advancing forward. When you compare other towns and other communities, and you drive through them, you say to yourself, gee, why couldn't Winthrop have that? Why couldn't we do this? Why couldn't we do that? It just seems like we could be so much better. We're surrounded by the ocean, we're close to this, we have so many things favorable to us, but yet we seem like we're in the dark ages on so many levels.
Well, the only issue that we're currently discussing, though, is the term length and the size of the town council.
Yeah.
If you can just
I'd
drive
rein
it
in,
back
I'd
to
rein
that.
it in, I would rein it in, okay, I'll end my comments, I would say incentive, offer an incentive for people to run for public office, 2 years, and see what they can do. And including all the boards and the committees.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You began the meeting by saying you wanted to bring more people into the forum, more inclusive. But yet here, you want to eliminate people in the next breath. You want to eliminate 2 councils at large. So that's a little bit confusing to me. There used to be hundreds of people involved in town government when there was town meetings. You know, the information was published. You could study it for weeks or months. And then when you got to the town meeting, everybody heard, everybody that was concerned in town government got to hear you. Right now, I've been to a few subcommittee meetings, very tenuous. There's practically one every day of the week, I think. So to get involved in this type of town government is very, very difficult. So I was hoping to see this group discussing going back to town meeting and putting that information out to the people of the town to see if they want to do that. I realize that no town has gone from an open meeting for hundreds of people down to a town council, then back to I don't think anybody's done it. I'd like to be the first one to do it. I'd like this town to be the first one to do that. Get back to a form of government where everybody is inclusive. If you want to find out something here, you have to go to a meeting almost every night, all these subcommittee meetings. And it's hard to do. So, and that's why there's nobody here.
We talked
A meeting
about
like this would be
that.
hundreds of people. Now you have 12 people.
We talked about that very issue. And what we determined was that it was over the scope of what our task was. Our task was to review our current charter, and to make recommendations of our current charter. To kind of take a full reversal of the form of government, it was my understanding, and it still is, that the town would need to vote to convene a charter commission to change the form of government.
Well, it's easy.
Before that
It was easy enough
ever
to change it
happens.
to this.
It wasn't actually.
I put the first signature, I was the first one to put a signature on the petition to change to a town council, number 1, with Mr. Delahanty. Came to me one day and said, this government is stagnant, et cetera, et cetera. And there was people that were trying to change the, I said, they're all sitting on their hands, they're not doing anything. And he said to me, Chief Delahanty, I know just how to do it. it wasn't a week before he came back to me with a petition to sign to change the form of government. It's not that hard to do. It's just that people, if you put it out there as a question, like you have questions here, put that out there as a question. This is not the first time that I've spoke about this issue. This is the fourth time I spoke about this issue where no one in the town knows what's happening. That's why you don't have any participation. It's hard to get involved the way this town government is set up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How do you feel about the at-large versus precinct?
Well, like I said, you started out to be more inclusive, and yet you want to eliminate positions, so I wouldn't change anything.
Okay.
Keep everybody on board. They've been interested so far. You know, they put in their time, so, you know, just let it go.
But if you look at like the number of seats that when they become vacant, no one's running. Seems like sometimes people will say they'll run just so we can fill a seat. There's no competition. There's nobody, that's the problem that we're seeing. So that's the reasoning for trying to reduce it, to create more competition. To touch on what you talked about, the precincts, as I understand it, and guys correct me if I'm wrong, but the state determines our districts. We're at 6
Precincts.
precincts. That's determined by the state. And we can't change that, combine them. What we could do is we could sort of combine 2 precincts to be represented by 1 person. So if we have 6, you could combine them. They have to stay equal, which might be a challenge in itself, but we could actually have 1 or even 2 represent 2 precincts. So then you could, that might generate, you know, so if you have precinct 1 and precinct 5 or whatever it is, whatever the combination is, you might have 2 people that want to, or are interested in running, but they might be more interested in running if they know they're representing 2 precincts where no one else is interested in running in that precinct, because now they can both be elected. So, I don't know, maybe there's a combination of.
Yes.
Thank you. As far as people wanting to know what's going on in the town, and I've said this a dozen times, I've been to many, many meetings going back to 2017 or so, maybe 100 meetings. And when I go to look for minutes, that I want to know something that was pertinent in that meeting, can't find the minutes. I spoke many, many, many times to many meetings of boards, and when I go back to look at the meetings, I might see my name once out of 20. So why would someone get involved with this type of government if you can't know what these subcommittees, et cetera, boards are talking about? You can't look it up. What I like to do, I know how to say, well, it's on YouTube. So if I want to hear something again that was said at a meeting like this, I have to go to YouTube. And why can't it be printed? When I want to say something about something, I like to get a piece of paper and highlight my concerns so that I don't take up too much time. Thank you.
And that's what we tried to do here.
Can I make
Yes.
another comment? I work with the health department, I'm the coordinator of the Medical Reserve Corps, and Jack is a good friend. And I know when we had town meeting, it was a wonderful time, actually, and we had townspeople come out and get involved, et cetera. With COVID, I would make a suggestion that you don't even think about a town meeting for at least 5 years, because we still have to deal with that. And putting large amounts of people together is still not the greatest idea in the world. That being said, I agree with Jack with, I don't feel that there's I look for minutes as well, and I don't know where to find them. And being an older person, not everybody Zooms, not everybody looks on the website. Those standing signs that we have that we paid a lot of money for are a waste of time because nobody really reads them. Out of 18,000 people, if 100 people actually looked and saw the notices on those boards, I would say that was a lot. So, I mean,
Anyone else here live want to be heard on this issue?
Zoom.
On Zoom, let's take it to the Zoom.
I had one thing to say too,
Yes.
about the subcommittees. For the town council, the subcommittee meetings, they're also repeated at every town council meeting. So I mean, the information that any subcommittee does, it's at the town council meeting also. So we do have that information there.
And Denise, if you could expand upon the issue of minutes, how long does it take for the town council minutes to make it to the website or to be?
They make it before every other meeting.
Okay,
So they make it, yeah, they're on time every other meeting.
okay.
I think-
Denise is wonderful, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of turn. I didn't mean Denise, because she's amazing. But some of the other committees, the other boards, when they have meetings, you can't find the minutes. Some of them do, some of them don't. That's what I meant by minutes, not Denise.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I can add to that. I do think, you know, we're talking about compensation and things, but one of the challenges from some of the boards is that we're kind of self-supporting, right? So you end up being the chair of that board, and you're ending up trying to kind of navigate between two people, having a talk with your board, and you're taking notes at the same time. I do think, you know, zoning board of appeals, planning board should have an allocated person that's a staff member that's doing that work, instead of trying to ask the members to take notes, which I'm doing here at this meeting too. It's just, it's that level of support that doesn't exist. People think that we're all sort of paid because we're part of the, you know, big G government. We're all volunteers. Everybody's basically volunteers, even the town council. When you divide that $2,600, they're basically volunteers too. It's just difficult, and without the resources of having someone, a stenographer, taking those notes, and then having the chairs be able to look through them quickly and post them quickly, you can see that's the excuse of the logjam of those minutes. Again, we try to do our best, but it's sometimes very difficult. I saw somebody having trouble raising their hand on the screen. I don't know, but I just mentioned that.
Yeah, we have a
Sorry.
couple.
Yes.
I would just like to, Paul O'Donnell from Precinct 1. I think that's a great idea, having somebody get maybe a stipend to be the secretary on a lot of these committees. It doesn't have to be every single one. Would probably make a lot of sense. I don't know if there are any stipends given to secretaries on any committees, but that seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Can I just touch on one quick thing too? I know we discussed when we were saying reducing the size of the council, is how we could merge some of the committees together so that there's not as many councilors spread out amongst all these different committees, where some of these actually have some of the same intent and can be put together, and the president can actually make some of those changes on certain committees. So that was actually discussed, you know, kind of as part of this, because to reduce the head count and keep all these committees, that would mean the councilors have to go on that many more committees to be on, so that makes it even harder for them. So that portion of discussion of reducing the committees to merge some together was had also.
Does anyone want an agenda? I guess. Anyone else? All right, I think we're into the Zoom.
All right, Shannon Poulos?
Hi, I know this is proposal 1 of 7, so I'll make this quick. Shannon Poulos, Precinct 3. I just wanted to say I definitely am supportive of the, for what it's worth, supportive of the 4-year term for the TCP and the 2-year for the town councilors. I think my only suggestion, and I think Ms. Maggio had suggested this earlier, is that, you know, we are a unique small town, and that it, you know, I think that I definitely support smaller town council for sure. I think that we had too many unopposed people this last election, which just, you know, goes to people just demands on their lives and maybe lack of compensation, et cetera. But I think it's unfortunate when you have unopposed people. I actually would go the opposite though and make them all at large. And I realize there might be a legal opinion point, only because I think that we again, going back to the point of, you know, just because I live in precinct 3, I can relate to people in precinct 5, or if you live in precinct 2, you can relate to people in precinct 4. So it feels like in a small town having these precincts, you could potentially have 2 really great qualified candidates that want to run in the same precinct, and then, you know, before you know it, you have someone unopposed that might not be as great, but that person loses out just because they're up against somebody else. So anyway, I definitely agree smaller, and I think I would lean more towards all at large. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we have.
So through the chair, for the purpose of this discussion, I think it's also kind of important to give some metrics to folks about the differences between when you run for a precinct and when you run at large in terms of what the vote count needs to be and the outreach that you need to have to do something like that. So I'm gonna park the whole whether it's representative government or not, because I have a pretty strong opinion about that, and I also am a little bit nervous about certain sides of town or parts of town that are more wealthy than others being more easily being able to be represented. And I think that that's a real issue for me. But it does take more money to win elections at large than it does to take winning elections that are precinct-based. It's just a fact. You can ask anyone that's run, and it's not close. And someone should know this better than me, but we're talking a few, $500 to $1,000 for some signs in your precinct to $5,000, $10,000 going at large or more, especially if you're going for president. It's a different story. But if it's a much bigger cost for the ticket to the dance when you make it at large, and I think that it does favor folks that have more means and or more time, right? And so that government might not be truly representative, and that's the position that I hold when we have these conversations about shrinking, but how to shrink. So just wanted to throw that in there.
I actually want to follow up with you on that.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
what about fundraising? Like, I ran for school committee.
Mhm.
I had donations to help me pay for my signs and stuff. I am not of means, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Does that not address the concern of it not being balanced and representative for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone can fundraise, so if you're starting with $500 in your bank account and you want to run for your precinct, you actually might have a chance of fundraising on top of the war chest that you have of your own money and going forward. I think if you're more affluent, you're starting at a higher, you're starting on third base and you can still fundraise, and so there's no limit on how much anyone can fundraise. So I just think it's the sort of starting at home plate versus starting at third base kind of conversation. So yeah, fundraising, I'm not against fundraising. I don't think you try to do caps on fundraising at this level of government. It seems like too hard to police and probably not super productive. But I just get concerned when you need to get 5,000 votes as opposed to 300 votes or whatever it is. It's just a bigger lift, and how to lift it sometimes is money is the easiest way to lift it. So just to say.
Well, my last point on that, just for the general audience and folks who are thinking about what we're talking about here. I didn't spend a dime of my own money. I know several people who have run who didn't spend a dime of their own money. It is possible to do it. And it's, in my opinion, it's fully representative. If you come from some of our subsidized housing, you can still raise money. In fact, I would argue you could probably raise more. But the point being, it is not completely fair to suggest that if you have means, you can't get elected. And I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. I just.
Next up on Zoom.
Okay. Rob DeMarco?
Can we cut his to 2 minutes?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
We
Yes. Just
Yes.
kidding, Rob. Yes.
Rob DeMarco, Precinct 6, under Councilor Ruggiero. Just a couple quick things. I just wanted to throw some ideas out there. I don't mind. So this is a weird situation for me because it's like, obviously, if something comes to the council that pretty much eliminates my position, I'm going to recuse myself because that's the will of the people. I'm not going to have anything to do with that. I do like the idea. The thing about the at-large positions that I do like is, when it comes to, there are a lot of people who feel like they can only go to their precinct counselor. Like, a lot of people will come up to me and say, oh, Steve Ruggiero is my counselor, I should give him a call. Joe Aiello is my counselor, I should give him a call. I think it's nice that with at-large counselors, people who feel like that have more people to go to. They feel like, I don't have to just go to my precinct council, I can go to the at-large councils as well. And that's one thing I like about it, I think it gives you more points of contact, more places to go. It might not even, I mean, don't get me wrong, if I was precinct 5 counselor and somebody from precinct 3 came to me and had an idea, I would obviously talk to them, but there are people who feel that way, that you know, you might not necessarily, they will only go to their precinct counselor, and having the at-large just gives them more points of contact that they're familiar with.
Rob, what are your comments on the term length and also on the thought of what if the whole council was at large?
Yeah, so for the 4-year term limit for the council president, I like it.
Term length, not term limit, just so everyone's clear.
I'm sorry, yeah, sorry, yeah, that's what I meant. 4-year for president, I like that. 2 years for counselors, I'm fine with that. I have no issue with that. As far as the all-at-large council, and Bob, I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit on this. We're only 1.5 to 2 miles large as a town. That's all we're at. You know, I also think, and just because I want to make Steve Ruggiero's job harder, is you could very easily combine precinct 6 and precinct 4. I think, I mean, you should see the map on Revere Street of where precinct 4 is versus precinct 6. I don't know who took that map, but it's crazy. You could easily combine 4 and 6. You could easily combine 2 and 5. I think the point needs to be its own precinct, but you could cut down the council, keep it large, and just combine the precincts.
So just for clarifications, the precincts set by the state, we have no ability to change precinct lines whatsoever as a town. We can combine precincts into districts or wards if we wanted to, and that could be used, but all of our precincts are roughly 3,000 people. They can't be more than 4,000, but for the most part, all 6 have 3,000 people in them. So as far as combining precincts, when that's being said, it would be for purposes of your counselor would be a district counselor, which would consist of possibly two precincts. Yes, sir.
Understood.
And again, just to follow that logic is that, and then if we want to make them representative or equally representative, that means you're taking 6 down to 3. You can't still leave the point by itself.
Correct.
Because then that person would be representing less people, right? You know what I mean? So you'd have to.
Or you're keeping 6, but allowing 2 for every 2, however they're combined.
Yeah,
You follow?
I think,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Now I
So-
think we're changing what we've discussed here.
Yes.
That is not,
I think-
that's not up for discussion.
I didn't mean to get us off topic.
No,
It's
no,
okay.
it's a different way to consolidate, which has not been the
I-
primary way we've been thinking.
Yeah.
Council DeMarco, any other comments on this?
One more thing, though, I would like to
30
discuss,
seconds.
because we were talking about money, even though I think more people would get involved if counselors got paid more, I can tell you right now, you know, I know Hannah's in the room, I can see the back of her head, and we would do it for free. We just do it because we love the town and we want to help. I don't think the $2,600 has enticed any of us. If anything, I would say the school committee deserves the same stipend. The school committee works just as hard as we do. They put in so many hours. Yet you get that. We should look at paying a stipend to the school committee.
Okay. Any other comments on this issue?
I see a hand up,
Hand
that's
on
Tom
Zoom.
Riley.
Mr. Riley?
Oh, he's muted.
Could you unmute? There you go.
Okay, for those of you that don't know, Tom Riley was our first town council president under the new charter. He's known affectionately by this committee as the George Washington of Winthrop politics. Mr. Riley, the microphone is yours.
Okay. One thought that I had when I was looking at your deliberations, I remember back to when several of us were on the Charter Commission, put the original charter together back in 2004. One of the things we learned at that time is there's no right answer to any of these kinds of things about the form of government or how to get the substance of the political terms. It's not a mathematical thing. If you work hard enough, you're gonna come out to the right answer. It's just a question of what people feel, and after you have enough discussion with people, you think is the right approach. But everybody may have a different opinion as to how the council ought to be configured. We just ought to all share our thoughts, and look, there's no right answer to it. Let me give you a couple of thoughts on what I see as the value of the current structure. We have councilors from each person. I think Bob Carroll was right when he said, it opens the door to people from different parts of the town that might not have an opportunity to get on the council, and it gives more people an opportunity to do it. I really worry about the fact that getting elected to office in town is becoming more and more costly. I think that you talk about a detriment to service. I think for a lot of people, it would be whether or not I could raise the money to run for the office. But if you want to run for precinct councilor, you could probably do it without having to gain an taking an awful lot of money. Staggering the council by having 4-year terms gives people an opportunity to learn. They don't have to run for re-election after 2 years. There'll be enough people there that have been on the council for a while, with new people coming in, they can help them out, they have some knowledge of it, particularly in the financial field. Our budget takes an awful lot of time, for anybody to tackle, to understand, to become really conversant with, and do it. The at-large council is office. I don't think the size of a council is a problem. I think we've got the right numbers. The legislative body, there ought to be a fair amount of input. You run a risk of getting it too large and being cumbersome. But I think the current size works fairly well. Again, there's no real right answer to it. I've heard a lot of discussion, pro and con, on the 4-year term for a council president. And after hearing all of that, I would say that I favor the 4-year term. Again, this is a very costly thing to run for the office. There's an awful lot that goes into it. I believe that the 4-year term would be beneficial. I think the idea that once you in your second year, you're turning around to run for re-election again, makes it kind of difficult. I think the idea of having 4 years, the same as the other councils, is a good one. I think that it requires an awful lot of deep discussion. So when it goes to the council, I would hope that they open up an awful lot of public participation on this issue, because there's an awful lot of thoughts, both pro and con on the thing. I think we need to, before we're going to make a change, I think we need to be sure that we've had enough public participation on the thing. Quick thing on the salaries. Current salaries were set when we adopted the charter in 2005. They haven't been changed since. We doubled what the selectmen got when we set this up. I was a selectman back in the 70s. We got $25 a week for the chairman.
How much a gas cost?
So again, I don't think there's any right answer. I think that I've got a couple of thoughts and some other items that you're going to have further on in the agenda, and get back to you then.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Mr. Chairman, just a thought to dovetail off of with this 2-year conversation. Let's keep in mind also that our current state senator and current state rep run for re-election every 2 years. So it is a feasible thing to do, and
It's
anyway,
doable.
it's doable.
Well, can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
By having 4-year terms, you're able to stagger the terms so that half of the council is elected in one term, half on another. It gives some continuity. We know that we have a guarantee that half of the councilors will be remaining in office. I heard someone comment that maybe they'd all get defeated in an election. Well, they all might turn and decide not to run for re-election. A large number of councilors didn't run for re-election in the last election. I think if we have people that stay on for 4 years, it's helpful to create some continuity. And I think electing half of the council in one session and half in the other is a good idea.
Thank you. Anyone else on the Zoom with their hands up?
Yes, we have Donna Segretti Riley.
Yes, Denise, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Donna Segretti Riley, Precinct 5, 3 Cottage Fork Road. I initially thought, like some people in the room, 3 years would be the magic number, because looking at 2, it seems if you run as a counselor for 2 years, you're just there, you get settled, you're getting things started to get done, and then it's time to run again. So I thought, oh, well, maybe 3, but I understand logistically you can't do the 3 because of other elections in town. So I would go, I don't know, I'd stay with the 4. Definitely 4 for the president, however, because to echo what, my husband indicated, it's just, you're just rolling up your sleeves, you're getting into a lot of issues and projects in town, and then you have to run again. So definitely the 4-year thing. I think the size of the council I would leave as is. I like the idea of 2 counselors at large. Sometimes you may not agree with your own precinct counselor, or they with you. And I just feel that the counselors at large are a very important element to the council. Representing the whole town as a whole. And yes, it probably costs them more to run, but it's maybe the downside of it. But I would leave things alone. But I would go for the 4-year. My preference being 3, but as I said, it's not just possible this time. That's all I have to contribute. I would like to just say thank you to Attorney Chamberlain and the entire committee for doing this. This is volunteer, and I know it's hours and hours of work, so I want to thank you for your efforts to do the Ordinance Review Committee.
Thank you. Anyone else on the line?
That is it.
Anyone else in person want to be heard on proposal 1? They won't all be this long, I promise.
I just want to say thanks, this is great. This is exactly the kind of input we need, so thank you.
All right, so moving right along to proposal 2. This is the addition of a recall ordinance. So currently in the town, there is no means for a citizens initiative to recall an elected official. Not such a problem if it's 2-year terms, but as a 4-year term, it can certainly create an issue. The struggle that this committee is trying to work through is making it difficult enough that it doesn't get used very often, but not impossible for when it needs to get used or when somebody wants to use it. So the process that we've been looking through some different towns, and it really comes down to the amount of signatures that one would need to get a petition forward, and then a second round of signatures again, and whether that's precinct-based or town-wide, depending on what position was being recalled or was subject to the recall efforts. So our expectation would be to ask the town council to consider adding recall language to our list of ordinances for when citizens do feel the need to recall an elected official. So on that, does anyone from the committee have any comments they want to make preliminary about this topic?
Good.
Okay, and why don't we turn it out to the folks live and in person? Yes?
Go ahead.
Michael, after you.
I was very fortunate in the council that I served with. Every counselor showed up for every single meeting and participated in what they were elected to do. Over the years, and I've watched some of the council, some of the council members were not that effective. There was a lot of absenteeism. Am I talking about the right thing here?
So kind of. So maybe we should combine 2 here to make it easy, 2 and 3. So we have the addition of a recall the addition of recall ordinance. And then proposal 3 is a change to the abandonment clause that's currently on the books. Currently, if a town councilor does not appear at 50% of the regularly scheduled full council meetings over the course of 1 year, they would be subject to abandonment of their seat. What we're suggesting and proposing is shrinking that time period down to 3 months, which would be basically, still 50%, but rather to have wait an entire year and see an empty seat there, that could be done after a 3-month period. Now, certainly, if there's any sort of a sickness or some reason that the council is not there, the town council has the right to vote and keep that person in place. But what proposal 2 is about is if a councilor, for whatever reason, was accused, I guess, of some sort of a malfeasance, what would be the process for the citizens to come up and say, we want to recall this person? Whereas the town council could certainly do it amongst themselves, but that's somewhat awkward and having the council kind of guard itself. This would be if citizens wanted to. Most towns have this provision in their bylaws anyway. But if citizens wanted to recall an elected official, what would those citizens have to do in order to have essentially a special election in order to recall that individual? So that's 2 is recall, 3 is abandonment.
Recess, not again.
I'm thinking.
All right.
Thank you. Jack Dowd, precinct 3. I wouldn't be in favor of having a recall if the president of the council had a 2-year term. I would be in favor of a recall if the president had a 4-year term. I think that's a little bit too long, judging from past history, in my history, to accept that this person would be the top person on the council for 4 years. So that 4 years have a recall, 2 years, no recall.
And that's sort of how the recommendation is written. We thought the same thing, that we wanted to make it challenging enough that it wouldn't be worth the effort or the time to put in for a 2-year term. Because by the time you can do it, the process you go through, you're...
So you guys are all in agreement to that 4-year with the recall type situation?
Yeah, at a 2-year, so you can't recall somebody within the first 6 months of their term and the last 6 months of their term. So on a 2-year term, you really just have that middle year anyway.
Then you might not show up.
They may not show up, you're right.
That's right.
So the recall language that's being discussed is really geared towards 4-year terms. And it would be almost burdensome to not do that over a 2-year term. It would be virtually impossible. It could be done, but from a time perspective, would be very, very
The
difficult.
abandonment, that would take care of the 2 years.
Thank you.
So can I?
Yes.
So there is some clarity. I know, Jack, you just mentioned, are we all in agreement? I don't think you'll hear if we're all in agreement until we actually vote on it. So I don't want you to think, or anybody to think that we're all 100% in agreement with these.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's a very good point. I think everyone's coming in tonight on this committee with an open mind across the board. I know I could certainly be swayed of whatever my opinions are about each of these proposals. And without question, I think there is nothing that's been decided. That's the point of having this public forum. Yes?
Suzanne Swope, precinct 6. Is there any language around the type of behavior that would warrant this kind of?
No, and the reason is it's very difficult to kind of narrow down what would be okay. So it really, the process itself has to be such that it takes enough signatures, at large would be 500 signatures, for example, to even begin that process. And so it's very difficult to say, well, if somebody said something we don't like, well, that could be free speech. Or if somebody...
Let's take that as an example. Let's say that does come up, and you do get 500 signatures, and it is an issue of free speech.
Then there's
So
a,
that person could be removed.
So just go through the process so that she
Yes.
understands, like.
so it's a
how-
multi-step process. The first step would be to have a petition, an affidavit, where 500 people sign it. That petition goes out, it gets certified by the town clerk, and the town clerk would then say, okay, these signatures are valid signatures. Then it goes to a recall stage, which would require another 500 signatures. And those signatures then are to actually go onto the ballot. Once we then, if it gets through that portion, we then have a special election as far as whether or not that person should be recalled from their seat or not. If that person is voted to be recalled, then we go into how vacancies are dealt with within the charter to determine how that seat would be filled or not.
Yeah, I'm just hoping it wouldn't be a huge political issue, it would be a legal issue or a moral issue or some kind of a very severe
And that's why making the bar
process so high.
as reasonably difficult as possible was really kind of something we hope we never use.
Right.
But by the virtue of having that there, the citizens are more empowered to hold their public officials accountable. And I mean, we are a very small electorate also, so 500 signatures
But we
is a
can't
lot.
be very good.
Yes, true. Mr. Munson?
So in the review of the process, John Munson, Precinct 2, is it true that without any signatures, the person's name that is being attempted to be recalled would be on public record? So you could just walk up, ask Denise, hey, I'd like to get a recall started, and for John Munson, he's a big jerk, and get him out of here. And then, so would it go on public record without any signatures or any kind of like town consensus?
Well, the town would, you would need to start getting signatures on that petition over a very specific period of time.
But without signatures, your name is muddied, is that
It
true?
is.
So that was I would love it if you could go get signatures to even pull the papers, because then you're getting consensus before you can muddy someone's name arbitrarily, because the accuser is just as guilty as anyone if you're not allowing for some kind of like consensus. That's just my pushback on that one part of
The act of getting the initial signatures, I mean, would muddy one's name. I mean, how could it not?
Yeah, I don't know that it would even, how does something like that even become, I mean, it may be public record, but how does that even become announced? I mean, unless
Correct.
Denise is posting it on her.
Well, if it's something they said, it's already gonna be on public record, and the people are gonna decide one way or the other.
No, I'm talking about just if someone were to go up and get a recall, ballot or petition.
Oh, right.
Until the initial.
I mean, it
until the
literally
initial
could be
signature.
something you have already printed out for all of them.
Right.
And someone just comes up and take it and
Right.
you don't, but that's like muddying I mean, it's not until they have the signatures and it gets submitted and,
Well, the people who sign it are gonna know what's up too,
Record.
so it's already out there. Once they start signing the petition,
yeah.
Right.
It would just be nice if the file were downloadable or a piece of paper at the town hall was retrievable.
Right.
And then they were able to get even a modicum of signatures to be able to even start the process and to put it on public record.
They need 500 signatures to start the process.
Okay, so that's the first part.
They need 500 signatures certified by Denise or whoever the town clerk is at that time, before the process is even really out of the gates.
Okay, that just, now I'm on board.
But someone's gonna stand in front of Nick's and say, John Munson's a jerk, sign this, right? I mean, they're gonna, you know what I mean? That's gonna be part of that 500, and John Munson is not a jerk.
That's all Bob Carroll said.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I'll tell you what, he's gonna be going to
We need
Nick's
a more
more now
hypothetical John.
to look for you.
No, absolutely not. So,
Quick question.
yeah.
Yes.
Does this just pertain to the town council, or does it pertain to everybody that's in the
Good question.
form of government?
That's,
elected.
it's all elected
Elected, just
officials.
elected, Not
Yes.
appointed.
Not appointed.
Thank you.
school committee too.
Anyone else live and in person want to be heard on the, well, why don't we, like I say, combine proposals 2 and 3?
I just hope everybody is not getting the wrong impression on this, what we're doing with the recall. Somebody is not gonna be standing in the town clerk's office and say, oops, we're gonna broadcast this all over town. It's not gonna be done intentional.
Correct, but those that are ahead of the recall effort are gonna be
Exactly.
loud in,
That's right.
in the
It's
public
not
to
gonna
try
come,
to,
what, I guess my point is, it's not gonna come out of town hall.
Right.
the bell will be
There'll be no
rung.
leak
Exactly.
from town hall.
The minute that person, or persons walk out of this building with whatever paperwork, that's it.
It's over.
I agree. Yes, Mr. Munson?
Can I ask why the 6 months after and the 6 months before was instituted, and put into that?
So, you don't want it to, the first result is you don't want it to be, you know, someone doesn't like the election results. So that's probably the first. The second is if it's at the end of a 6-month period, it takes 6 months to get through the recall process anyway. So if you only have 6 months left, what's the point? Recalls are expensive. Recalls cost about $25,000 to run an election. So it's not something that is going to be used and hopefully ever used. But that's what it's there for.
And if I mean, the whole idea too is a deterrent factor. Like if you know you're gonna be recalled, perhaps you'll perform better. Because let's be honest, we've had some challenges. I mean, I'll say it, we've had some challenges on both committees and councils. People that don't know, they couldn't find the budget, it hit them over the head versus people who don't know anything about what goes on in schools. So we really need to start stepping up here and improving the bodies.
I understand having a form of recourse against someone that's just not right for the job. That's fine, but what I wonder is, ultimately, aren't you basically just looking at 1 year effective for recall?
If it's a 2-year, if it's a 4-year term, then it's a much larger.
Yes, it's not likely to happen in a 2-year anyway. It's pretty much self-police.
I mean, that's really what you'd have for recourse, is that if you don't like the person, they're gone and
You vote them out.
Yeah.
That's what a 2-year term does, but in a 4-year term, if you don't like that person, voting them out could be 3 years later.
Not to just keep on talking, but it does feel like you gotta do one or the other. You either keep the terms, you remove recall and keep the terms at 2, or you have the recall with 4-year terms. It doesn't seem to me like that you're really having any point in the recall if you're having 2-year terms.
There's always gonna be someone with a 4-year term potentially. It's the town council president and school committee.
Oh, I see what you're saying, so this is,
Yeah, I think the thing that we're struggling is how you do these things and try to think of how to write them in a vacuum in a way, right? Because we don't know if someone's gonna take the 2-year term thing, you know, we could say we vote, we wanna do the 2-year term, we put it to the town council, you guys say, that's a great idea. But if you don't, then, you know, make sure the language still makes sense. So that's why we're trying to do the 6 months on either end, so it makes it pretty worthless to attack a 2-year person with a recall.
So, I understand that point, and so, just to make sure I understand, it's 500 to get the recall started? Or have you guys decided numbers, because I haven't seen.
That would be for at-large.
Yes,
For-
precincts would be 300.
Yeah, precinct would be
We
for
still have to
300.
vote on this.
Okay.
We still have to vote on this next meeting.
Yes, Mr. Depp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do any of the councilors have a 4-year commitment?
Yes, all of the councils except for the
So
TCP.
if someone runs for office for 4 years and then decides he doesn't want to be there anymore, and then you appoint somebody to that position, not elected, how does that work out?
It would be the same thing. So if they're appointed to a position due to a vacancy under the charter, either on the school committee or on the town council, they would be selected through a process. And if, for whatever reason, folks wanted to recall that person, they would have to go through the same process
Same
of getting
process.
500 signatures and
Thank you.
kind of a 2-step process there.
Or they'll just be up for election.
Because they're gonna be up for election, quick, the next election.
Correct.
not
So when
the
someone's
full term,
appointed
right?
to a position, they're just filling that remaining term of the seat they were taking. They're not getting a new, fresh term.
Yeah, they would have 3.5 years for that 4-year term, but that's an appointment and not an elected position. So I hope that language is in there, that if someone's
I understand.
appointed
Yeah.
because of an opening, that the same conditions exist as if the person was elected.
It's an excellent point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to be heard on proposals 2 and 3? Not yet. Go in line first. Anyone on Zoom?
Yeah, we have Rob DeMarco.
Rob DeMarco, Precinct 6, again.
Still?
Still. I just wanted to say, I'll be really quick, on, number 3, the abandonment, clause, I 100% agree with it. Of course, if there was a health issue or a family issue beforehand, then that can be brought to the, council beforehand, before they took like a leave of absence, I think that would be different, but for the most part, 100% agree with number 3. With the recall, I know a lot of past, town council presidents disagree with this, but I'm actually in favor of it. I think it's very important to keep us accountable, so I'm all in favor of having a recall process. And finally, one more note I wanted to make, and I think, Mark, this is you, I don't know if I think so, but you said, this might be a special election when it eventually goes to the voters of the town, whatever proposed changes there are.
Yes.
And I've heard that, and I've discussed this with multiple people, whether it should be a special election or a regular election. I'm not gonna take a stance either way or whatnot, but I just wanna keep in mind that usually 9 times out of 10, a regular election has a much higher turnout than a special election. And I think we do wanna have as many people involved as possible in this process, just for transparency.
The recall language that we're discussing actually does require a certain percentage of the electorate to come out and vote in order for that special election to even be effective. So it can't be a scenario where 14 people come out and vote and somebody's recalled. It has to be a percentage of the electorate.
Understood, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Town Council President.
I understood Rob's question a little different. I think he was talking about the process in its totality. At some point, you know, you're gonna, if you've probably gone through this earlier, but some substantive changes will eventually go to the voters through
Yes.
the town council. And I think Rob was talking about when that gets voted on. And I think, is how I understood him, is he was, my thought is that if you're gonna come before the council in a relatively short period of time, we got suggestions, the council's gonna discuss it, talk about it, have a hearing, and then we'll recommend yes or no on whatever issues, and then that will go, whatever substantive changes that are proposed would go before the voters. And I think what he was saying was, when would that go before the voters? The options would be a special election in March. We have a city form of government, right? So we can't have local elections on even number of years along with a state and federal election. We would have to have a totally separate thing, which would be very confusing, I think. So I think that what my thought would be is that we would have a special election in March, which would enable changes to go forward in November. If we waited for November, and now you're waiting 3 years after the proposed changes, and that would be 2025 when there'll be another charter ordinance review committee. So I think the goal would be to try to have a special election, that any changes that the community accepted would take effect in the November elections of next year.
And in the event that Mr. DeMarco's comment was really where the election would happen in a recall, if it was on the recall.
Totally different.
So if you're within 120 days of a scheduled election anyway, it would move to that actual election. So you wouldn't have a special election if it's at the end of the term, regardless, if there's an election coming up. So if there is a regularly scheduled election on those 2-year periods, and that individual that's being recalled has a 4-year term, there wouldn't need to necessarily be a special election. If it's within 120 days of another town election, it would go to that election rather than having a whole separate election.
And that's gonna help turnout and cost, right? I
Yes.
would guess.
Yeah, the idea is not to have special elections if possible for recall specifically. Anyone else want to be heard on proposals 2 and 3?
We have Tom Riley.
Tom Riley.
You on mute, please?
Okay now?
We can hear you.
you.
Maybe, okay, all right. I've got some strong reservations about recall elections, and I think we ought to be very cautious about our approach to this. First of all, they're extremely divisive events. A person gets elected to an office, and they make a decision. The decision is unpopular with some vested interest group in the town. The other ones would be able to gather the signatures. They always the vested interest people that can put a recall election forward, because they've got the capacity to go out and make the, and gather the, and gather the signatures. It usually, most of the towns that have these, it's usually around the personnel decision. The selectmen appoint a police chief. People don't like the person they just selected. In Stoughton, the Board of Selectmen didn't reappoint the acting police chief. They let his term expire and appointed someone else. They had some conversations with the district attorney that were done in private. That led them to not reappoint the police chief. There was a recall petition. Police officers got their friends, they went out, they got signatures to recall the selectmen. They recalled a good portion of the selectmen. 6 months later, there's an indictment. But the selectmen who didn't make the decision not to reappoint that police chief are out of office. It goes to, you know, I'll give you an example. Donna was just on here a minute. Donna was on the school committee. Donna appointed a superintendent of schools and 2 principals. After all that was over, a year later, they had a vote to hire a basketball coach. People didn't like the basketball coach. We got all kinds of letters at home. People that were upset about the selection of the basketball coach. Now, if there was a recall, people may have been able to put something together to do that. In terms of the election itself, it's hard to run it. A person's recalled, so their name was on the ballot. In Fall River, they had a recall for the mayor down there. He was indicted for all kinds of federal crimes. And there probably should be something in there for those kinds of events. I fully agree with that, with that. I have no problem with an indictment being a disqualification for someone serving in office. But the way it worked is that question 1, should the mayor be recalled? Yes or no? The yes votes were 60%, let's say, but there was a solid majority for the recall. The next question is, who's the replacement? Well, they couldn't preclude the incumbent mayor from running. That mayor got 37% of the vote or something in that regard, but he won the plurality. So he's back in office.
Oh my God.
You know, I think you have to be extremely cautious about how you put these things together. You have to have some very strict criteria. So it's not just a popularity thing. It's some kind of malfeasance or some kind of thing that it doesn't. It can't be that somebody dislikes a decision that someone makes. The other thing is that there are no checks and balances. The council president can't make a decision. There's hardly anything that the council president has the authority to do that can't be overridden by the rest of the council. There's an awful lot of responsibilities that they have that can only be done by that person. But there's very little authority that the council president has that the council, if they choose to, can't override. On the school committee, there's 6 other members to the school committee. If someone doesn't like if there's someone who's not doing a job well, there's a sufficient number of other members who can be in a position to correct things. The divisiveness of somebody who ran for office being kicked out because they made a decision that was unpopular is just something that we need to, I think if we're treading in this direction, we need to be very cautious and think this thing through as to what the criteria are, what the standard is, how many signatures would be required, and so forth. I would just go with something that talks about some kind of indictment thing and leave it at that. But if people choose to do it, again, I'd be extremely cautious about how the proposal is put together.
The language that we've been looking at, I believe it's from the town of Pittsfield, that it's been vetted by the AG's office, vetted by the Collins Center. It's language that's been, people have sued over, so it is something that it's not new language by any stretch. We're not here reinventing the wheel by any stretch. We just don't have that.
There's plenty of this. I'm certain that once you decide what the criteria is, there's language that recalls are in effect in a lot of other communities, so there's other language that can be utilized. I just worry about the divisiveness of that kind of an election, and the fallout from it. If I campaigned very hard for my friend to get elected council president, and then he or she was recalled because of some decision that they made that was unpopular with a vested interest group in the town, I'd be very upset for a long period of time after that, and those feelings are gonna linger. You know, all of us who've been involved in town government and politics have been on the winning side and the losing side numerous times, and we get over it, and we go back and we're okay. But a position where somebody can bring down somebody and vote them out of office without some solid criteria for what those grounds ought to be, I think it's just so divisive that it argues against doing it.
Thank you. Anyone else want to be heard? Yes.
I just want to,
Certainly.
it was my point before, Tom said it better, and I think, I don't know the language that you have from other places, but I think we do need to be cautious on this one.
On the criteria, specifically? Or the criteria of what could be
Yes.
grounds for recall?
Yes, I'm sorry.
So may speak up on this? Thank you. The hard part on that is who determines what that criteria is? Because you can have opposing side trying to say, no, it should be this criteria. I don't like the way they dress. And this person says, well, you know what, I don't like the way they talk. So where do you find that common ground? You usually can't with a recall. I don't think you'll find really any recalls through the entire state that actually has you can only recall because of this.
Right,
So I
but
think that's the
so
hard
the
part
answer
about
to
it.
that, so
I just
the
like the
flip
CPH's
side of that
language
was to make it difficult to do, to make it, to have a recall, to make that recall process a challenge, because
And it's the citizens making that choice. It's not anybody in the form of government. To recall is only done by the citizens, and again, to try and create a list of you can and cannot recall because of this, this, and this, it's near impossible.
I bet you the AG language though is pretty.
It's pretty much what was given into this proposal that's been reviewed by the AG's office.
Anyone else on these two issues? Anyone virtually? All right, proposal number 4, a proposal to remove use variances. So, Winthrop is one of 13 communities that permit what they call a use variance. No one is suggesting that the ZBA be disbanded or the Zoning Board of Appeals be disbanded. No one is suggesting that the Zoning Board of Appeals not be permitted to grant variances. What a variance is essentially, we have zoning bylaws that require setbacks, that require height restrictions, that require various things, and those things can be varied. You can receive a variance for front setbacks, for example, where if you wanted to build a house and the shape of the lot was such that you needed to put it 15 feet from the roadway instead of 20 feet from the roadway, you could apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a variance, and the Zoning Board of Appeals could grant it, provided it's not a substantial detriment to the neighborhood. The same goes for use variances. Somebody has a home, a single-family home. It's a giant house. They want 6 units out of it, though. And they're surrounded by residential on all ends, and they want to turn it into an apartment complex or a condo complex. They could go, currently, under our bylaws, they could go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and 3 members of the Zoning Board of Appeals would make the determination of whether or not a use variance would be permitted. The problem with that is that those 3 individuals are appointed, they're not subject to elections, and those 3 individuals would be making a decision that could impact an entire neighborhood. It could impact the entire town. A hotel turning into apartments, for example, or a 2-family mixed-use property that is turning into 16 units is possible. By creating, or rather by eliminating use variances from our ordinances, somebody that wanted to change the zoning and do something different with the zoning than what the zoning map says, they would first go to the planning board for a recommendation of a change in zoning. Then they would go to the town council, an elected body, public hearing, and they could make their plea for a change in zoning of a particular parcel. Then it could go to the zoning board of appeals for any other variances that are needed. Side setbacks, front setbacks, height, things of that nature, percentage of land that is being taken up. So there are two different types of variances, just to be clear. Use variances are the only ones we're speaking about here, and Winthrop, again, is only one of 13 communities that allow and provide for use variances within their bylaws. So, that being said, does anyone on the committee want to be heard about this topic?
Yeah, I just want to add to that, as you're thinking about this piece, right, because it's really a relatively easy process to apply for use variance here, you do attract developers, and there are some folks in the community who do not want to see overdevelopment, some folks who don't like, and I'll be first to admit I'm one of them, all these tract type of buildings that are micro condos. I think they do have a place in certain parts of our community, but I don't think they have a place everywhere, and so, I do think that you should consider that as you think about this particular proposal.
So, being the member on the Board of Appeals that has to deal with this, although that I am in favor of this, changing this, because I feel like too often our board becomes a design review board, which we really aren't. We're not supposed to be. That's not what the intent of a ZBA is, to be a design review board. That's the more inclined to the planning board. And I'll put my attorney hat on for a second. I'm not an attorney, but there may be a problem with doing it in the manner you're suggesting, because if it goes to the council and they're voting, it becomes spot zoning, which is illegal. Not that I'm not saying we shouldn't still pursue this, I'm just saying I'm not sure that's the right way it be handled. The other thing I would suggest, even if that's not the case, to avoid now the council taking up all of their time with all of the requests for rezoning, is I think if we were to consider something like that, the council also has to put a strong consideration into reviewing, possibly rezoning certain areas of town where we're seeing that are underdeveloped and need to be rezoned to get the development we're looking for. I mean, the whole stretch from Shirley and Veterans down to Crystal Cove is an area that should be looked at and rezoned, much like what was done with the Center Business District. I think that's lacking. There may be other parts of the town too that need to be reviewed, but if we were to make a change like this, I think you'd need to, otherwise you're just gonna be inundated with zoning request changes, use request changes.
Well, to discuss the issue with spot zoning, use variances in and of themselves are essentially spot zoning. You're taking a use that's, the neighborhood is different than what's in the neighborhood, and you're saying that this.
You could argue
parcel
that,
is different.
except you're not changing the use, you're issuing a variance to change the use.
Yeah.
That's the legal difference, I guess.
But, it would bring zoning changes to the map as a whole, I hope. Like you're saying, it would be a scenario where, look, this section of town needs to be looked at for apartments. Let's look at this section and look at changing the zoning of a particular section. Whereas if it's only 3 people making a determination of one of those parcels, it becomes kind of an unfair burden, and it's difficult to challenge.
But I'll also point out, and not that the planning board is the final decision on some of these things, but the planning board is only, how many? 7? 9? But they're all appointed too.
Yes.
So, whether you got 9 people making that decision or 3 people, yeah, that's a big difference, but it's.
Well, the planning board's role, as I understand it, would be to make a recommendation. And that recommendation would then go to the town council, and the town council would vote on it based on input they receive from the public naturally. It would be more transparent. And
Right, but the point is if someone came in front of the planning board to request a change in the use, the planning board's not reviewing that design. You know what I'm saying? Like that, they're gonna get the change in use, and then who's reviewing that design, and what criteria are they going by? I'm just saying, there's a lot of, pieces there that I think are missing, if you just keep the zoning the way it is.
Yes. I think really what's important is that, however the process of changing zoning emerges from it, that use variances probably aren't the best path to get us there. That it makes people feel, abutters in particular, will feel like they have very little voice, and it's very non-transparent, potentially, if it's something happening in their neighborhood. And that there's gotta be a clearer way for somebody to say, this is what I wanna do, and for it to be a public meeting that everyone has access to, and if they don't like the results of it, they could recall their elected official, or they could vote them out on the next election. Mr. Carroll.
So, having sat on the planning board for a number of years, I'm just an advocate for there to be more public process in some of these moves. These things, these changes in the middle of residential, which most of our community is residential, resi. We're seeing there's a lot of pressure. We're a wonderful town. People want to come and move here. Developers want to, make units here and make money from being here. So I think just having it just go away from just being a sort of a much simpler process where you can kind of just go to the ZBA and have it be more comprehensive. I mean, someone's going to say the Center Business District is not perfect, and I'll be the first to admit that, but that was a comprehensive conversation that took 10 years. And you're seeing the results of it because it worked together. We've got surface improvements as well as infrastructure improvements that allows now developers to come in and fix some of the properties that were empty. Again, it's not a perfect thing. We're still working on the edges of it, but I feel like there was a very inclusive process and a very slow but deliberate process to make that a reality. What happens when you use a use variance is, if you have a big enough lot next to your home, anybody could put anything. Now, the use variances we're talking about are the more common ones, where you take a single residence and make a multifamily. That's because multifamily is pretty hot, but use variances allow any kind of use variance. So like you could put, again, if the 3 members of the zoning board of appeals thought it would be okay, they could put a cemetery near your house, or industrial use, or whatever. There's a whole list of every use you can imagine on any lot. And it is just really a wild card. And what it does is just cause individuals in the community to have individual hand-to-hand combat with developers, as opposed to thinking about those areas in a more comprehensive way. And again, I think it has to do with a public process that is a little bit more fair, because again, all members of this community do not have the means to go hand-to-hand with the developer and fight things in court, which is usually where some of these things are heading. So that's my pitch for removing it.
And also the committee want to be heard on this proposal. Want to put it out to the public? Yes.
I just want to tell you, as a sidebar, 16 years ago when I was on the council, we were talking about developing Crystal Cove Deck, and so you can see how far we got. I absolutely believe in a public process. There have been things that have been going on in the town that neighbors wake up and all of a sudden there's something there that they didn't know about. So I believe in a public process. When something of that kind of nature comes up, that it should be brought out in the public, whether it's at the council meeting or whatever, but a public process should definitely go into effect.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
God bless you.
Scoreboard?
Pretty much.
Nice
The
scoreboard.
timer.
Tick, 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 tick.
Good idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At many meetings, well, not many meetings, I've mentioned a few times, maybe 4, 5, or 6 times, about the Humphrey Street Overlay District in Swampscott. It runs from the church to the Cannon Park. And There were many older homes there. Developers built them, bought them and built them. I think it's all built out now. But it's a change of use, but not drastic change of use. You could hardly tell that it wasn't there 100 years ago because of the conditions that the town or the planning board or whoever makes to build a particular type of building there. It fits right in, cedar shingles, little porches, windows, the whole bit. If you go down and look at it, it's very, very impressive. I've mentioned this 4 or 5 times, but it seems my comments go unnoticed because there's a particular group of people that want to develop the center. I don't particularly care for the way they wrote those rules down there, and I think that's going to be, as we can see already, that it's not going to work out. We have 8 miles of coast here. The Humphrey Street overlay, the backyard is essentially the Atlantic Ocean. So I read the Humphrey Street overlay paperwork. It's about 16 to 20 pages, and it's very technical.
So if I may, what I think you're referring to is design review standards. So that when a developer comes into town, they would be expected to meet certain design standards in their proposal, and that the planning board would then, or the ZBA, would then have the ability to look at what these proposals are. And you're right, they're very technical. They're 15 to 20 pages. We looked at those. We tried to get somewhere that we could start to look at design standards. It's more than what this committee was brought in to do, and it's more than what we can do, frankly. 16 pages of ordinance is very detailed. It's not something that would be really thought out if we were to do it because it's so technical in nature. That being said, I think if you look at the Somerset building, you'll find some people that say it's absolutely beautiful and some people that will say it's a hideous monstrosity. Design standards are very difficult to write, is why I say that, because beauty is always going to be in the eye of the beholder.
My point being that each individual developer, like 66 Shore Drive, wants to put 20 units on a coffee shop, whatever. But if you had a change of use, and you can only do what's in that change of use, you wouldn't have to go to a board, every individual person looking for something different, to suit their needs, instead of having an overlay district, it's like a stretch of land someplace, and you can only build what is in the change of use. You don't have to be particular. You don't have to, grab whatever you want to grab.
This is designed at someone, though, that wants to do something that's outside of what the permissible use is in their neighborhood. You're in a residential neighborhood and someone wants to open up a bar, just for example. They could, in theory, go to the Board of Appeals and say, I would like a use variance and have a tavern here on the corner of Main Street, and everyone around them is a residential house, and here we have a question. More often than not, the Board of Appeals will probably deny that request. But we don't know what future Board of Appeals will be. We don't know what 3 members of the Board of Appeals would get selected on any individual case. So to eliminate the ability for use variances would make a much more transparent process, that if somebody is varying or changing the use of the property that they have, that it's a public process, and that the public has an opportunity to be heard, and it's not happening in a vacuum.
So I take offense to that in the sense that the ZBA does not operate behind closed doors. We are a public forum with public meetings, everything is public, the same as the planning board. I agree that it should be changed, but you keep saying that it's being done in a vacuum, and it's not.
You're right.
Abutters letters go out, there's a process, yeah.
There's a process.
It is, but it's something that can occur, that a meeting can be continued to the next meeting, and then to the next month, and
But that's
you
no
lose some
different than the
steam.
planning board.
Correct, and that's why if the elected officials are ultimately the ones making the final decision of whether a zoning should be changed, then at least there's some accountability there. It's much more transparent. granted, yes, the ZBA and the planning board are absolutely open meetings, and I don't mean to suggest otherwise. But this would put elected officials kind of on the hot seat to make that final determination, if that's what they want.
And just to say, like, I agree with the idea of having more comprehensive planning over an area of town, and that's why I'm sort of for removing those use variants and doing it in a way that's an overlay district, and it's a conversation about that whole precinct or adjacent neighborhoods. That can't happen through the ZBA right now, because it's just one parcel at a time.
Right.
And, you know, you folks are doing your best, one parcel at a time.
It's not the intent of the ZBA.
It's not the, yeah, you know, and again, like, that's, yeah, not your deal. And so, and also, yeah, it is public and it gets announced, but it gets announced with like, something's going on, you know, 10 Main Street. And if you're like at 200 Main Street, you might be like, yeah, who cares? But like, you have no idea if a skyscraper's going up or whatever. Anyway, I just think like, it's sometimes not as obvious what is going on versus like, you know, we're gonna have multiple town meetings and talk about redoing the center, which is kind of what we did. And again, for better or worse, it had a lot of input.
Yes.
I'm listening to both sides and.
Just introduce yourself so we can make
My
sure.
name's Michael Fielding, I'm in precinct 2, and I was here about the item 7, but this interests me. So you're both fighting a turf war, and what makes the quality of the decisions better in an elected official in a political platform as opposed to appointed volunteers? And the single use item by item has its merits as well as what you're advocating. Why don't you create something new with both qualities? And instead of having it in the political arena or having the overburden fall onto a group of volunteers that, like you say, plans and all those types of building things, go beyond their scope or beyond their abilities. Not their abilities, maybe their time and such.
So, you know, the interesting thing is, because we're such a small, dense community, is even if this change is made, which I am in favor of making that change, but most of these types of developments, they still wind up in front of us because they require
Well, that's why
other-
a hybrid
other
would-
variances
that's
that
why a
can only
hybrid
be
would
done
be
through
better
ZBA.
with elected officials in the political platform. The one that greases the wheel is gonna get more advocacy, whereas the appeals board more or less advocates for the smaller guy. So I think the developer would have the edge on the elected official stage, and the neighbor, so to speak, would have the edge in the appeals board. So a combination where you use both sets of your skills and qualities would be better than handing all the power to one or the other.
I don't think it would be handing the power to the town council. I think the ultimate decision would go through the town council.
Well, being
But I
able
think
to
the-
zone, like my neighborhood, and put a new zone in my neighborhood, which is a residential neighborhood, that's a lot of power.
The recommendation, though, would come from the planning board. It would also probably be a recommendation from the ZBA.
But you have to vote, they don't.
But there's also a public hearing for all that too, on
Correct.
top of it, for the
But
citizens.
my lack of knowledge on town government will probably is showing now, so I'll stop.
Fine, I mean, the goal here is to create a more transparent, more accountability. It's not to make it less inclusive. It's so that people don't wake up and see something in their neighborhood that, you know, they may have known about, they may have been given notice of for a
I'm watching
butter.
too many Washington politicians, that's all.
All politics.
Yeah.
Yes, Steve?
Just to piggyback off of that, that's exactly the point I was gonna make. You know, pros and cons to everything we've talked about tonight, and any one of us could argue either of them either way, but I think this is an interesting one because you are taking something right now that has a process that is not political, but you are making it, by bringing it in front of the council, you are making it a political thing, right, ultimately. If you're advocating for a development, right now you are most likely hiring an attorney and you're going to the Board of Appeals. If we go this way, you're going to be advocating to elected officials. Again, I'm not saying which one's better or worse, but this is a significant change. I think the pro of this is that you're adding 2 extra bodies to the review. So right now, it's the Board of Appeals. The decision's made. By going to this, you're going to the planning board, the council, and then maybe also the Board of Appeals if you need a variance for whatever, swimming pool. So, there's a little bit more of a well, I think the burden is a little bit higher for a developer in this case, because you are kind of navigating this three-body process, and again, I could argue that's a good thing, because there's more accountability, but that's also a bad thing, because it wasn't so long ago where Winthrop couldn't get folks to come here and develop in town. And now, we have the opposite problem. People really want to come here and be here and do these types of things. So, yeah, just sort of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just, through the chair, I would just say a lot of the projects, again, because of the nature, the density, how small a lot of the lots are a kind of tag team between the ZBA and the planning board. I think the more public input, the better. The more neighbors are aware, so they don't just see something, a hole in the ground show up next to their house one day and what's this? And, again, even if they got noticed, sometimes people miss these things. So it just, I think it just gives it more visibility and more transparency. But I don't think it's as much as a turf war as just getting more volunteers looking at a really important problem and making more people aware by removing this. So that's why I like it.
Mr. Hanlon?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that something that Mark said at the beginning is that Winthrop is one of only 13 towns or 13 communities that does the use variances. And I don't think there's anything about us that's super special that we should be one of the 13. I think we should do it the way every other community does it, which is what this change would do.
That's one of the reasons I'm on board.
It's a huge thing, because it's important people understand we don't have a robust planning department with lots and lots of people. Our inspectional services, not lots and lots of people. So there's not a lot of infrastructure there that could take this on. It relies on volunteers. So, yeah. Good point.
Mr. Munson?
At the beginning of this conversation, I thought this was a no-brainer. The more we've talked about it, the more complicated it's gotten. But I do feel as though it moves a little bit of the overlap between the two departments, the planning board and the Board of Appeals, and it's made a little more clarity. And I think that it's still a no-brainer, especially with your point. And I think that anything that's making an impact on the whole entire neighborhood should go to a larger body with more, as you said, more regulatory oversight. So I'm in favor of it too.
So I'll make one quick note too, just from not really being to the Board of Appeals and the Planning Board, from an outside looking in and listening to a bunch of the meetings, I think there's a misconception of what a variance actually is. So you're supposed to provide a hardship as to why you need this difference in the zoning. So people were, a lot of chatter about the property that was proposed up on the beach with putting in a coffee shop on the first floor. I believe it's residential A there.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't even go and bring that to the Board of Appeals if this use variance wasn't there. Because it's in place, they can go right to the Board of Appeals and say, we want to put a coffee shop there. So that's where you come back and go, well, what's the hardship? So I know I've been on a couple of calls and I've said, what is the hardship that they're asking? There is no hardship to put a coffee shop in that area because it's not zoned for it. So it doesn't make sense to have that kind of variance to be brought and take the time up of the Board of Appeals on it. And now if they came in and said they had a 6 unit, they want to make it into a 10, 12 unit, that's a little different. And what is the variance needed for that? So that's where maybe I was confused when I first started listening about variances and what they are. And I'm for, first thing I'll say I'm for is removing this because it causes additional work on the Board of Appeals, in my opinion, that doesn't need to be there at the moment. And it will give developers a more direct, okay, this is what the zoning is. Okay, well, I need an extra 6 inches, 10 inches, a foot, to put this part of the building in. That's kind of what when you ask for a variance, in my opinion, is you need to show that hardship,
Yeah,
that's
that's
what
an
you need.
excellent point. I mean, the Board of Appeals primarily is governed or operates under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, which I think it's Section 10 that defines variance, and when you read that language, a use variance is not offered in that. And yet our town and 12 others have decided to change that language to include use in there.
Just for clarity, so 48, Section 10, what it says is that use variances are prohibited unless expressly stated or provided for within your bylaws. So it's actually kind of a negative that you need to create a positive within the town. And again, we're one of 13 towns that have created that positive. Anyone else on the board want to be heard on this subject? Let's put it out to the people.
Not too much.
Anyone in person? Seeing none. Anyone up in Zoom world?
Donna Riley?
Yes, this is a very interesting discussion, and I can't help but agree with many of you who have already spoken, but as someone who went through this, not just myself, but my family and my neighbors went through the building down on Somerset Ave from, say, October 17 until mid 2020, and the situation did end up with a lawsuit and a lot of pain and suffering on the residents' part. But I just can't agree with enough with those who asked for, and I've heard this repeated at least 3 times, maybe 4, more public process. It's just so essential. It seems that of late, and when I say of late, maybe within the past year and a half or so, you see structures that were, okay, 3 families now, they're working on making them 6 units. And you just see some developments that you say, like many of you have said, you wake up and then they're building next to your home. And there was a map, we just did that on the meeting on June 21 at the town council, where there was a map clearly defining what the center business district was, and yet the contractor was not advised, supposedly, or didn't know that the person's home was not in the center business district. And we had that map defined at the town council meeting of October 15, 2019. And I remember that was at least one positive thing we got out of it. But there's language such as it changed the character of the neighborhood, I vaguely recall, that are impacted with these developments that, all of a sudden come up, whether you're down on Beach Road or whether you're in the center or opportunities or whatever. Just more public process. I'm really not sure about how to fix it. But if there's any way to make it more public, I would agree with that. I know in the instance of the very positive outcome of having to define center business district map, which gives the homeowners at least that feeling of safety that their home isn't going to be taken away or looked at as a part business, and then therefore we can go up as high as 4 stories next to a home, a residential home, which was back in our case. We just need to fix that. The planning board and the town council met and talked about, okay, which streets should be in, which streets should be out of the center business district. And there were like 12 homes in various parts of town, many of them in the center. So there were, the map was formed. And that was the process. And then they went to Rules and Ordinances Committee to make sure that everybody was doing it right. Each property was called out and who could speak on this property. And then finally, it went before town council and it was voted on October 15, 19. So that It seems like you get the building inspector and they say, oh yeah, you got this permit, and then there's some issues, well.
Don, I'm just gonna ask you to finish your thought if you could. We're trying to keep everyone to 4 minutes the best we can.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's quite okay.
Yeah, but I just, yeah, if there's any way to make it better, more transparent, more public input, please do that. And I'm not sure how, but the current thing is a little faulty, it seems.
Anyone else in Zoom want to be heard?
No.
Anyone else in the committee want to be heard on this? Moving right along. Proposal 5, recommendation to the town council for formation of a water sewer strategic advisory committee. This was brought to the attention to this committee as a means of creating additional oversight, additional people and citizens to assist with the water and the budgeting of water. It's something that we've discussed, I wouldn't say a great deal on this committee, but some of the concerns I know that we initially had was that the details of how this committee would be formed may be over and above what this committee was formed to create, and I'm saying what the ORC's job is. It seemed like it may be a stretch to actually draft language for a strategic water advisory committee. Rather, that would be something that the town council would probably be best served doing within their own rules and ordinance committee to get into the intricacies of what this could be. So I think in the event that we vote to move this forward next week, it would be, and certainly this too is subject to vote, but it would be to vote to recommend or not recommend to the town council for the formation of a committee like the one described, but that we would fall short in actually proposing the language for a water advisory committee. But again, that is all subject to vote. I'm simply one member on this committee, and I know there's other opinions on this very subject. So that's roughly where we are on it. That being said, does anyone on the committee wish to be heard?
I'll just add on to that. I think, well, I know, since I've been on the council, the number one thing that people have talked about and emailed about and called in about and wrote to us about is the water sewer rate and all things water and sewer. So the intent here is to just create an additional level of public oversight on that process. Right now, the town manager's office sets the water rate, and you know, when there was a select board, a similar committee to this existed, where it did sort of allow for that public participation. We no longer have a select board, as we know. So I think, you know, just from sitting on the council, I think there is a desire and a passion for the public to get more involved with this process. And I agree with Mark, maybe this is a bit of an overstep for this committee, but I think nonetheless it's worth talking about. And yeah, I guess I'll just stop there. But.
Anyone in the public want to be heard? Yes.
I think this is a really important thing, and like Councilor Giro mentioned, this is the transparency around the water rates is huge, and that's what people are looking for. I agree that I think maybe the council should take it up separately than a charter change, but this is a really important thing, and I think there's a lot of components to the water and sewer system. There's infrastructure, there's some administrative side, so the more eyes looking at it, I think the better it will be for everyone.
Anyone else in person want to be heard? How about up in Zoom?
Shannon Poulos?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit outside the scope of your ordinance review committee, but I mean, I do think that the lack or the absence of our representative from the town to the Mass Water Resources Authority has been pretty evident. I don't know what's going on there, but I think they're, like Hannah just alluded to, I mean, there's multiple components to this, including our infrastructure, obviously in the cost, but, you know, there's mitigation, there's rates, there's, you know, water loss, and I don't know what's going on there, but I do think that we need to figure out a way to get that representative more present or more vocal. I don't disagree that it's a huge issue, particularly for, you know, housing in Winthrop and utilities are a big issue, and affordability. And obviously water is a huge, huge part of that. But I just think that the absence of that representation, or that at least transparent, obvious representation, or, you know, seeing that person at a town council meeting and figuring out what's going on in the application for the town, it's kind of deafening. So I realize it's a little bit outside the scope of this committee, but given that that came up, I think I just, you know, I have mentioned it before at the town council and in other forums, and I think it's really, really important. I realize that I think it's still a governor appointed position, but we gotta figure that out.
Anyone else in Zoom?
No, we're good.
Right. Anyone else want to be heard on proposal 5? See none. So proposals 6 and 7, these have kind of come to us in the later stages of our analysis, so it hasn't received the same vetting that we've kind of given the other proposals, whereas some of the other proposals we literally discussed over a period of weeks. So it's a little bit different. Proposal 6 deals with the requirement, would be a proposal to have the Board of Licensing to be required to confirm that the sign bylaws are being met when dealing with the review of common victular licenses, liquor store licenses, restaurant licenses. Every year, every common victular, every business in town comes before the Board of Licensing for an annual review, a renewal of their license. What we've heard when we were going through the sign ordinances was, we have the sign ordinances, they're good, they're there, but how do they get enforced? And because enforcement kind of was the problem that we were looking to solve, potentially by putting this onus on the Board of Licensing, a convenience store, for example, that maybe has cigarette ads decorating their entirety of the windows, that when they come up for their annual review, that rather than putting it on the building inspector to go down and be charged with lobbying fines, that the Board of Licensing could do that as part of their annual review to confirm that's being done. And perhaps that would kind of be the incentive for businesses to take that added step in making sure they're complying with the sign bylaws. Our licensing has awarded or granted, I believe, 3 stores to have beer and wine, 3 convenience stores to add beer and wine. Well, that's not in itself an issue. If our sign bylaws aren't being followed, we're gonna be a town with neon lights that say Bud Light and the Marlboro Man waving, and I think one of the things we looked at was to try to say, how do we create an enforcement ability without putting this on the building inspector? But again, this came in very late, kind of in our analysis. It was discussed, I think, at our most recent meeting 2 weeks ago, and be interested to hear what the committee thinks and certainly what the public thinks on this issue.
Well, part of my thought is with the signs, it should be the inspectional services, and at the time that they go to inspect every building that they have to for the renewal, that can just be put on their form. That's something they have to also look at.
Whether they're in compliance.
Right, well, they're already there.
So it would kind of be a 2-step process.
He could be doing that, he could do that now, he doesn't need to.
Oh, no, he could do it now, if anyone had a complaint.
If people knew what was in our sign bylaws, it's laughable, because I'm not sure there's many businesses that abide by it. There's that much violation. So what's the point of having the bylaw, those bylaws, if we're not going to
Right, I
abide
mean,
by them.
we could do an annual, I mean, we could do a semi-annual, every 6 months, we could order one right now if we wanted to have an inspection of every common vic and liquor for this particular reasoning. You know what I mean, so anything like that could be done.
Well, going forward to the future, I mean, would it be something where the building inspector would be added to the list of departments that would be signing off on each of these license renewals? And that when, again, when the Board of Licensing gets it for the renewal, they would see, oh, the building inspector said they're not in compliance, or they are in compliance with
Right,
the sign
oh yeah,
bylaws.
100%, I think it should be put on the inspection,
but
there's
if
a
it-
form we send out.
I think if it hits at the time of renewal, it kind of forces the issue going into perpetuity.
Right, 100%.
So,
Yes.
I know you were previously on the Board of License, I'm on it now, and I think putting it on the back of the Board of License would be not the right way to go about it. I think the inspectional services is the way to go, but I also think with every yearly renewal, there should be included in the renewal, the bylaws of signs as we're signing it. So as we're going forward after the next few years, they can read the bylaw and go, oh, well, yeah, I'm not meeting what it says, where I have, you know, the whole window covered and I'm only allowed this small portion of the window. I think that would be more effective with also trying to drive that message that you're not in compliance and we would like the town, which we hear a lot about our town, the aesthetics of it, how it looks and the beauty of it. When you see a window plastered with all different ads, it doesn't really meet the intent of the sign ordinance, which is created that should be followed. So I think included with this would be a rewording or included in the license renewal is the bylaws giving to the people who are getting their license. And working hand in hand with the inspector.
Right.
Wouldn't the delay of a license renewal, though, be the ultimate deterrent?
I think so. But I understand, I think what Kurt is saying is there may not be the people appropriate to determining the bylaw or interpreting the bylaw and doing that. So I think it might be a combination of, okay, license coming up, inspectional services provides a report to them that says they're not in compliance with the sign bylaws. Now you can do both.
So it would be incumbent upon us to basically rework this so that the building inspector or inspectional services would have to certify whether or not every establishment is complying with the sign bylaws prior to that renewal coming in. So when that renewal comes in, the Board of Licensing could say, or would say, are they in compliance? Yes, we move to renew, because the renewals happen very fast. I mean, every business in town needs to be renewed in the exact same month. It all happens extremely fast. Denise does all she can to push it out so that they're not getting inundated with all 52 licenses in the same week, but at the same time, they do all come in together. To be able to have a box on that license renewal that says, you know, are you in compliance, you know,
Right.
I think it makes sense, and I think it would create
100%.
enforcement.
Because I mean, we send a letter out with the renewals. We can easily add that on. I mean, we add on the cigarette bylaw, we add on, you know what I mean, now we have the
So you
other
could send a
bylaws.
sign by law then too.
We could send the sign bylaw, that they have to be in compliance at time of renewal.
So
That would
there's
kind of
also-
wake someone up going, ooh, am I? You know what I mean, it's like, well, they won't be renewed.
So there's
So we could
also
add that.
two separate. So within the Board of Licensing, there's actually wording for signs. And then there's also the separate one, which I
Right.
think ties into the planning board.
ZBA. That
Yeah.
sounds right.
Yeah, I think it's whoever references it, if we,
Yeah.
I think there's a push to, like, we need to update that signage, because there's some things that are unconstitutional, we know, like, from the state, so I think there's things that needs an overhaul, but it should be in one place, and therefore, all three of us can reference it, and the users can reference it.
So I think what ties into the business though, for advertising signing there, it's pretty clear. There's nothing unconstitutional, nothing like that. It's the other wording tying into running for office. Yeah, there's some
Bigger problem, yeah.
issues with that. But when it comes to, if you go down any storefront and you see some neon signs in it, well, if it's a restaurant, they're not supposed to have that in a window. If it's a convenience store, they're also not supposed to have it, but they're also not supposed to have the windows plastered with signs, because that's in the other ordinance, not the Board of License, where it has a listing of requirements for signs. So I think if we had both aligned so that it worked, I think it would be beneficial. It would help the businesses actually understand what's going on with the site.
When I was on the Board of Health, we had the Tobacco Coalition work with us a great deal. And actually, they went into all the stores because there is a restriction on signs advertising cigarettes, tobaccos, things like that. And they would make inspections themselves. They would come through the town and they would actually give, violations, things like that. So I would suggest that maybe you contact the Board of Health and talk about and see if they're still working with the Tobacco Coalition on the signage and what they're not allowed to do in stores that sell cigarettes.
I think it's more of how do we create a policy or a system so that it's off into perpetuity, that we can wind this up and we know that year after year, inspectional services is gonna make a determination of whether they're in compliance or not, and that there's a safeguard in place that that license isn't gonna get renewed unless they're in compliance. Because I do think it goes to the way the town looks. I think the town's gonna look, if every convenience store and every liquor store just ignores the ordinance, the sign ordinance, it shows. And the more stores that are convenience stores that are selling beer and wine, the more of an issue you're gonna see with it. So I think it's not so much dealing with the problem in the immediate present, but how do we set something up so that going forward, we have kind of checks and balances in place that will safeguard kind of the ignoring of the bylaws as it appears to be right now, with some establishments, not all. Yes, Mr. Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I like a good laugh too. You said the sign language is laughable, but what is the area? 2x4, 4x4, what is on the books right now if you wanted to open an establishment, hang a sign off? What is the square footage? There is a law.
So this is more windows. 25% of the windows is the maximum amount that you could cover. You can't.
How about the sign itself?
The sign itself, that deals with, so that would be dealt with by an actual application for a sign, and that has a process in place. I don't think we're necessarily looking at.
No, yeah, you're talking about like the
Lettieri's
Deli.
There is a limit to how much.
There is a limit to that.
Let's give everybody a head start. What's the limit?
It has to do with the size of space, I think the amount of frontage you have.
You have like 4x4 or 2x4, the square footage of the sign, that's what you have.
Right,
Yes.
but it's calculated based on the size of the establishment, the property. I think it has,
Never heard of it.
It's geared towards having uniformity, and each of those signs are approved, applied for and approved, but this gets more into the windows.
So
we're talking
my
more about
question is,
advertising.
Is there a square footage for a business sign? I'm not talking about windows, I'm talking about just the sign. Is there
Like a
a square
shingle
footage?
on the outside of the building.
Yes,
There is a square footage.
yes, there is size requirements.
So who knows what the square footage is?
I do not.
All right, so let's give everybody a head start and mention it. Put it in the newspaper. If you're gonna change everybody's business, you might as well let them know about it.
Well, no, you wouldn't be changing the grandfathered in signs anyway, you would be changing future signs, but this board's not considering that. It goes to the windows, that if the
It
windows.
goes to advertisements, not,
So I don't
not
care
the
about that.
establishment or
All I
the.
care about is the size of the sign.
Yes, Steve.
And don't quote me here, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe the guidance that the council has received in the past was that you can't discriminate on the type of sign by the size. So you can't say, you know, the sign advertising the business can be this size, but the sign advertising a political sign can be this size, or a sign advertising, I don't know, a town event can be this size. I believe that is the guidance that we've received, so I don't wanna like derail this entire conversation, but maybe there needs to be a little more research and digging into this before we make a formal recommendation to
Well,
the
again,
council.
we're not
But,
talking
yeah.
about the actual size of signs. That is all being dealt with, and signs have to be approved, and
Okay.
that portion. This is the actual license holders, what they're doing with their windows. So that if you're driving by a local convenience store or a local liquor store, are you inundated by beer signs? Are you inundated by cigarette signs? Are windows being plastered with product that's on the inside? And is that something that's detrimental to kind of the aesthetics of the town? Is I think what we're looking
Okay.
at in this
And so
direction.
Another thought I had is, does the ABCC have any guidelines on, you know, alcohol advertisements in window signage? Is that something that they would look?
No product, our
No
bylaws
licensing
say
code.
no products should be advertised in the windows.
No, right, but I'm just asking, do you know if the state, the ABCC, has some regulation that we can kind of just mirror off of this? I'm not sure if they do or not, but I know that the ABCC is very closely involved in the regulation of
Again,
alcohol. That's what
this
they
is
do,
one of
so,
those scenarios where it's an enforcement issue, not laws on the books issue.
Okay.
So the laws on the book isn't really the issue that was before us. That seemed to be pretty comprehensive.
Okay.
It's the enforcement of that. How do we create an avenue to create enforcement short of
Thank
the
you.
building
Okay,
inspector going out and giving fines that could be largely ignored? If you're holding that license back, is that gonna compel compliance with the bylaws as they currently stand on the books?
Got it, okay, got it,
So
thank you.
I think just the point that Tom and Kurt were making is the sort of who goes and checks it. But I think you can have your cake and eat it too, where you're still having the building inspector who's best at understanding the rules as they're written and using his eyeballs to figure out whether they're in compliance or not, and then reporting back to the liquor license board to say, yeah, we're all good.
Yep.
And so that I think is a good way to connect those dots. I think that's kind of why we're here tonight, is actually to take the rough edges out of some of these things, and I think we just did that.
To make a point.
Mr. Dow.
I'm concerned. Sometimes a business has a sign 20 feet long on the side, over the front door, 20 feet. Not only that, but there's another sign below it that's 20 feet long. That annoys me. But can everybody put a 20-foot by 2-foot sign on their building? I was under the impression that you could have a 4-by-4-foot sign awning, or, like size of the television, whatever it was. I think that's on the books.
There's design review
So
standards.
I have it,
also.
it's,
Go ahead.
you're allowed one primary sign per street frontage. So if you're on a corner lot, you get 2. And that's 20 square feet. But then there's also secondary signage, which is like awning signage, and it's also different for when it comes to like shopping centers, like a Michael's Mall. So it's different. But it is pretty. But I guess to answer your question, it's 20 square feet for a primary sign.
Thank you, Tom.
You can be any shape you want.
It's good work.
That's why we keep
It's the
them around.
best.
That's why I keep them around.
Anyone else live want to be heard on this? Mr. Town Council President.
Yeah, so on the signage, so we're talking about signs like, bread, $1 a loaf, and it's a 4-by-4 sign on a 5-by-5 window. That's illegal, it's 20% of the window space. But this all just comes down to enforcement. It doesn't matter if it's during the licensing period or not, because you could take the sign down, get your license, then put it up in January, and then you're all good for another year. It all just comes down to enforcement, and it just comes down to any time of year. It doesn't have to be a license time, and this gives, inspectional services more opportunities during the year to go down and say, okay, we're gonna check on signage, we're gonna check on this, we're gonna check on that. I just don't know, it's a paper sign for the most part, right? It can be taken down and put up in a blink of an eye. It's not like a fire, an alarm system or something like that, that you know what, they're not gonna go out of their way just to put an alarm system in for December and then they'll be okay for a year. I just think to add this, it's just, it comes down to enforcement like anything else, like tickets, like anything else, right? If you could have all the rules you want, if you don't enforce it, it doesn't matter. So I think this, you know, yeah, it might give them a suspension of a license for 30 days, but they can put the sign, they can put the posters back up if it's not enforced throughout the year, it doesn't matter. So I think it's more of a, to me, it's more of an, you know, a directive that we give to inspectional services to, hey, this is something that we've seen that's being abused, we should try to enforce this.
We'll just give that one time per year. You know, granted, yes, some might take them down and put them back up, but if you clear your windows and to comply with the bylaws, and then you put it back up on January 7th, I think inspectional services is gonna have pretty good grounds to issue some violations, and they're
I
probably,
think that's what they could do throughout the year. I mean, nobody's trying to shut down a business or prohibit them from having a license. They want to try to encourage business and have it flourish, but I think they want to do it in the proper way that's written down, right? You don't want to, I mean, it's been years and you know, there have been convenience stores that have just the huge advertisements for whatever it happens to be, and it's irked me for many years too, but it's just not, if it's not enforced, it doesn't matter what the rule is.
so again, this is just simply trying to create a mechanism for
No,
enforcement.
I understand that, it's
So
just,
anyone else want to be heard on this issue?
We need a sign czar.
Yes,
That's gonna be his last comment is something I was gonna allude to
You
on
wanna
the
be the
next
czar?
proposal. Because we can all agree that enforcement is a major issue for a variety of reasons and a variety of topics.
Issues, yeah.
If we want inspectional services to be successful in enforcement, you have to make sure that the town has a budget and the resources to make inspectional services successful in what they do. If they're understaffed, if they don't have the resources to do all these things to enforce it, then they're gonna be unsuccessful, and it's just, things are just gonna go chaotic very, very fast as they are right now. And if you, I would suggest that the town speak directly with inspectional services and get their direct feedback on how they can make inspectional services better and effective, and make their authority to enforce possible. And that would be the vital key to say that we have an enforcement problem, we all acknowledge we have an enforcement problem, but how do you make that inspectional services, all their tasks, and if you keep on adding on all these tasks on top of their primary duties, which was like 10, 20 years ago, was completely different than what it is now, how do you make inspectional services successful? And that is the fundamental, that is the starting point, that's where this race begins, is when you make inspectional services successful, not just say, oh, that's their job, that's their job, that's their job. How do you make them successful? And I would suggest that you speak to inspectional services and get their feedback on what they would need and what resources they would need to make them successful, to make them to be able to enforce all these things that we're talking about. It's clearly they don't have the manpower and the resources to do it. So you're just like beating up a dead horse, you're telling them, yeah, they need to do this, 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 and this, and this. But they're just physically unable to do it on a variety of fronts. So that would be my ending comment on this topic before we proceed to proposal number 7. Thank you.
One quick note.
yes.
I think we did just get a second full-time person,
yes.
so.
No,
Inspection,
no.
part-time.
Part-time?
A part-time person became a full-time person.
Yes, that's
So
what I
we
meant to
added
say.
the part-time.
So there is some
There
work,
was
on the way.
some
discussion by
feedback.
Some finance
Yeah.
committee
I
members
wanted
that
to
wanted
put,
to add an
I
additional
wanted to
person.
put another part-time person on, and it did work out in the budget. Yes, we did give
Part-time, full-time.
the part-time person a full-time position.
We had 2 full-time.
But then I had asked to take that and give us another part-time person. And of course, we didn't have the money, so it fell through.
But I
Just
feel
like you said, to your point,
it's
we
a
need a
step in the
czar,
right
you need a
direction.
czar just for that alone, to
Exactly.
be the police of all these things, that you need that alone. And like, to your point, you hired they resigned, they were in charge of the health department, you added on another task, they had no knowledge about any of the enforcement. So if you're giving somebody the authority to enforce, and they don't have any knowledge of enforcement, then you're destined for failure. And
Just
that's what-
just to refocus us on
Okay.
here, what the proposal and what the consideration is how do we give inspectional services the tools that they need so that then when the Board of Licensing is making that annual decision for renewal, that they've made it easy for inspectional services to say, yes, they're in compliance, no, they're not in compliance. And there is an annual way of checks to making sure that this is being taken care of. If there's complaints, if there's, for liquor establishments in particular, if there's complaints, if there's drunk driving coming out of an establishment, if there's underage stings, things like that going on, or if there's fights breaking out or something like that, that all comes into the Board of Licenses' annual decision on whether or not to renew a license. So this would just kind of be one more component of that, is this license holder in compliance? Yes. Excellent, we move on. You're not in compliance, why are you in compliance? Well, your storefront is littered with cigarette ads. Well, come back to us next month when you have it and we'll look at your license renewal then. It would create a system that could go on annually into perpetuity versus things are a mess right now. We gotta go talk to the building inspector right now. Let's get to the building inspector there to lob some fines. We get nowhere quick without having a czar, because they are always gonna be overmatched. There's just more to do than you'll ever get, and that's with minimal development going on. You have a big development project, it gets worse. So from that perspective, I think we're trying to find a way that we can help all of these departments get to the same endpoint, which is we need compliance with this bylaw, this ordinance.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe more staffing, more people, I think. Would you agree with that? Would the town have a budget to add more people onto that?
To take the words from Phil Boncory a few years back, the town has no money. So you need
So now you need volunteers perhaps to be czar, maybe on a 3-month period, or what people, I don't know.
Many things are possible. Anyone else have any comments about proposal 6? Yes, 6. Anyone up in Zoom land?
Rob DeMarco?
Rob DeMarco.
1 minute.
Hey, everybody, Rob DeMarco, Precinct 6. Mark, I agree with you in terms of like, if there's a situation where people, we have underage purchases or, have some shady things going on in storefronts, especially liquor stores, that needs to be addressed. But when it comes to like signs and windows, I mean, I'm gonna point to Ronald Reagan and say, government isn't the solution to our problem, government is the problem. I mean, our businesses have been through enough with COVID, with everything that's gone on. They're, you know what I mean? Are we really going to be nitpicking about the signs in their windows? I don't think that's what we should be doing right now. I hope we don't enforce those kind of rules, and I'm against enforcing them.
So what other rules in the zoning bylaws do you think we should ignore?
Mr. Counselor.
I mean, rules that are serious. I mean, underage drinking.
So which rules aren't serious, thanks, so you don't have to enforce them?
Oh, no, well, I mean, you can have a, what's it called? You can have a.
Recall.
You can enforce whatever you want. We don't have the ability to enforce whether somebody has a 20-foot sign versus a 30-foot sign. All right, and I know I'm not making sense in terms of code. I'm just throwing hypotheticals out there. But I mean, are we really gonna go after businesses for having a sign that's like 2 centimeters too big because it says Bud Light or whatever? I mean, like I said, the businesses in our center have been through enough. We need to give them a break, and we can't be nitpicking and like trying to get them for any little minor infraction that they have.
I will say, Rob, that the one liquor store in the center is probably the poster child for abiding by the sign bylaws. Their windows are perfectly.
Paul does a great job. Paul does a great job.
Perfectly.
So why should Paul have to comply and the mobile station can plaster Bud Light signs all over their building?
Why do you care if they plaster Bud Light signs all over their building?
Well, why would I care if Paul did, down at Sweat Slickers?
I wouldn't care. The whole town has been beautified by this center project. It looks great. I see people and kids sitting in the center at French Square every day now. they don't care what's hanging up in the liquor store, they're not looking at that. It's just a fruitless argument, it makes no sense. For example, okay, Jim Lettieri, I see you there.
Is that
Okay,
wrong?
so he carries Pepsi products. So what if you put a big Pepsi sign in his window? I wouldn't care, you shouldn't care, it's his vendor, he's helping his business, what's the problem?
The bylaws on the books.
Yeah.
And I do think also with signage, and not as much as, I do think there's a reason
Oh,
why.
well, we got people on
I do
camera
think
and
there's
live
a
talking.
reason too, and I think even in this day and age too, you wanna try to keep your windows, to me, as open and as possible, so in case somebody comes in to try to rob you, you're not covered with signs and you can't even see in and out like that. I just think, you know, there are laws on the book or signs that, you know, we could change the laws and make it that the windows are covered, but, I mean, I think we're really.
Just the
getting far
opposite, the
astray from this
design
whole
review
thing, but-
standards that the CBD has, that were painstakingly gone through, those design review standards actually say that the windows need to be clear. On a new building, that you need to maximize windows on the street, because there is some uniformity that we're looking for within the town. And, you know, the example that Rob's using of a Pepsi sign being in Lettieri's Deli, not that there is one, but if there was one, that's not really what the point of is here. We have store after store that the signs are just, that the windows are just covered from end to end with, like I'm saying, cigarette ads. You know, where more and more of them are getting beer now. You got neon signs coming.
I don't care what somebody puts in their store windows, if you don't like it, don't shop there.
No, but I think there is something to conformity, and in years past, there's always been these storefront improvement grants where you try to get things to look similar. I mean, we have ordinances on awnings that are supposed to be 18 inches off the building. There are far and few between awnings that are 18 inches off the building. Now, you can get a variance, and, you know, we can go back to the zoning board of appeals, and now that they have more time, if we take the do that, but, I mean, you know, in some respects, you say, geez, why only 18 inches? I mean, at least if it's raining, if it's a normal size awning, I could get under it. But the code says 18 inches off the building, so, and there's something to that, if everybody was the same and it was conformed, it looked nice, and, I mean, we did just spend $14 million on the center, you want it to look visually attractive too, like, you know, whatever we do for development or whatever, everybody says that, you know, they talk about empty storefronts and stuff like that, and they talk about it because it's a blight, it doesn't look good, we're trying to enhance the town. So, but we're getting very far upstream from Milton
Yes,
Six.
Mr. Carroll.
But in all fairness, like, for example, Councilor Munson's there too. So like, for example, if Councilor Munson had a sign in his business that said photography that went over the line, we have to cut that out. We have to fine John for that. It just, it doesn't make sense. And with the businesses going through,
Rob,
with the businesses going through all they.
What if John had a neon sign flashing in his business that said nude pics taken here? And it was flashing all night long, and the neighbors that live across the street from his shop have to look at red neon signs saying something that's displeasing to them.
I understand your position. I understand that as an extreme situation. That is different than a Bud Light sign. That's different than a Pepsi sign. That's different than a free beer sign or whatever. It's not the same thing.
the point is, it makes it more efficient for enforcement of laws that are on the books right now. That's what this whole
That's all
thing's
we're
about,
debating.
that's it.
That's all it is. Just trying to take the
No-brainer.
laws
We're
on the
gonna
books,
make the-
make an avenue for the
For the
building
limited
inspector.
staff.
It's a money grab.
Okay.
Efficiency is what we're
We
looking
have
for.
someone
We're not
else on
debating
Zoom?
the
Zoom?
sign law.
Someone else on Zoom, what do we got?
Jess?
Hello. I think we're going away from the topic. I think the topic was renewing the license or can you hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Yes. So, with the law is the law, or the ordinance is the ordinance. I don't think we're debating that here, or that's not what Proposal 6 is debating. It's whether the people that have the permits are they're in compliance, but the people that don't have the permits or are not, in this case with the alcohol, they're doing the signs too big, that they are not in compliance with that, and that goes for any permit. So how do you propose enforcing those, not giving them their license back? The town inspector still has to go and inspect them, right?
Yeah, so what the suggestion would be is, as part of their annual renewal process, the building inspector would check the box that they're either in compliance or not in compliance. If they're in compliance, the Board of Licensing would know that they're in compliance, and they would move on with the typical annual renewal. If they're not in compliance, the Board of Licensing could inquire further. They might say, you know what, they're not in compliance, but they're substantially in compliance, and still allow the renewal. They may say, you know, they're not in compliance, and this is why. Come back to us next month, and once you're in compliance, and show us pictures of your storefront. And that's another way to get everyone into compliance without having to have a sign czar.
Great. And I know that this is about the alcohol, but what I think is a bigger discussion is people that do not have permits, and not just for alcohol, but people that do not have permits. How do we enforce that if they're not abiding by the rules and the ordinance?
This is just for license holders. This would just be license holders that have convenience stores, that have liquor stores, that are restaurants, that are coming up annually for renewal of their license.
Yeah, I think my point is another point, but I think we need to discuss that another time.
Yes, Denise?
Also too, if someone applies for a permanent sign, they have to apply through the ISD. So right then and there, they're told what they can do and how many feet and all that good stuff before they can put a permanent sign up.
And this largely isn't the issue, the permanent
Right,
signs.
it's not the permanent,
Those
it's-
are, there's
They're
permits
fine,
in
right.
place, that they're going up after a certain review process. This is the littering of store windows with.
Not
Whatever.
following the bylaws.
Any other comments on this intriguing issue?
No.
All right. Proposal 7, Airbnb. So this is also one that we did not, we had initially dealt with, I would say probably in meeting 3 or 4, Kara might say 5 or 6, but we initially we initially went through the Airbnb. I think someone came in on a public comment, and it was really high up on their issue, and we list of issues, and we took a good look at it, and we came to I think the collective conclusion that, subject to a vote obviously, but we came to a collective conclusion that this was an enforcement issue. This was not a law on the books issue. At our most recent meeting, we did have some comments regarding Airbnbs and the language of Airbnbs and whether or not they need to be reviewed. We have one of the architects of the Airbnb bylaw here tonight. Excuse me. And it's 10 years old and it hasn't been changed. Airbnb has changed considerably since then. We still have the same, excuse me, original ordinance in place. So the question then becomes is, we're looking at this ordinance and we say, what needs to be changed? I know at the last meeting you said, well, the word transient isn't effective anymore. It should be traveler, because transient has connotations that are different, and traveler would be more in line with what we're doing. So we took it and we said, we're not necessarily prepared for this to be part of this forum, but at the same time, I think it was an important enough issue to put on the agenda because there are people that want to be heard on this very issue. So just went through the document itself, the ordinance itself, and came up with some topics of discussion. These are not topics, these are not issues that this committee has vetted, have discussed, have analyzed. Rather, they're topics intended to bring discussion of the Airbnb bylaw and what they think changes should be, could be, would be, what we should be considering, so that we have a little bit more direction at this, because I think we're headed in a direction that we're gonna probably make some of our decisions sooner than later on all of these issues. So I'm gonna ask everyone to abide by the 4-minute rule. It's getting rather late, and I know there's many people that might have comments on this thing, on this issue, and I think it's important that we try to get as many people's comments as possible with the limited time we have before the building gets shut down. Not that the building's getting shut down.
Can I just add
Yes.
2 sentences? So I was part of the group with the planning board that put this together, and I know there was some public input. I recognize Ken from that conversation. It was also, we're looking with the fire department as well. And so we're concerned about life safety. We're concerned about, if you're staying at a hotel, there's certain rules of what a hotel is. If you're staying at an Airbnb, we want to encourage that. We just want people to be safe. And then the other thing is that, again, the primary issue is that if you go online, probably right now, there's probably 100 Airbnb options available to you right now, and there's probably about 10 that are registered. So, what's going on there, and maybe thinking about some kind of fine structure about folks that operate clearly probably without registering and without having those life safety checks in place. So that's the issue that this conversation is trying to solve, I think.
Yeah, I would say we don't, we could be here all night if we get into the specifics of what the zoning says. The bottom line is it should be relooked at, revamped. The town should take a hard look at what it is they want from it, because it hasn't been successful just by terms of less than 10 approvals in the however many years we've had it, and all the illegals that continue. So obviously, we can change the zoning, and maybe that would help bring some of them willing to become legitimate, but it goes back to enforcement also. If it's not, if we can't find a way to enforce it, it's another zoning, like Rob thinks the signs are just useless and should be tossed out.
We'll call that civil disobedience.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I got a quick couple of points that, when we had our meeting, and I think there's some excellent points brought up about why it needs to be changed and looked at. And I understand how it really should be brought to the forefront with how many illegal Airbnbs are in our town and surrounding community. It's actually amazing. And it took me, not even a minute just to pull it up in Winthrop to see on Airbnb, and there's a lot of listings on there. To take even inspectional services, 10 minutes, sit down at the desk, pull up Airbnb, and you can see it. And they could just go right over there and say, you're not an Airbnb.
I thought they didn't give you the address of the location.
You can contact them and all that, but we'd have to figure out how that actually works. But you can see the house in, our town. I mean, I looked at like 5 different locations. I'm like, I know exactly where that is. So, but just looking at that, but then looking at some of the feedback of increasing how many more rooms for it, I know I'm touching on specifics, but
I think that's another discussion.
it does need to be a different discussion, because when you start adding to it, in my mind, I instantly go to Airbnb as a business. Well, it should be operated and charged as a business for room fees, all that, just as if it was like a hotel. If the Arms is charging per room for the week or a day or whatever they're doing, is a town, I believe, collects a fee for it. So Airbnb should be paying the same exact fee, in my mind. So that should be looked at. The trash aspect, I brought that up. They're a business. Town isn't supposed to collect trash from a business. When you have Airbnb, there's additional, usually, trash, because people don't tend to wanna bring stuff in, bring stuff out. They'll eat, they'll put their trash, if they're eating there. Other microwave was brought up, which is a whole nother safety concern in my head. So, I think this really does need to be looked at if we wanna improve it for our town. I mean, one, for, the income for it, and 2, for those who do have their license or permit to run are fairly getting what they deserve to have in town, and push out the ones that are illegal. This needs to be kind of, in my head, prioritized.
Just 2 points on this. In terms of, I guess, strategy for this committee, whenever there's an ordinance change that we're going to recommend, I would just ask that whatever that recommendation is as specific as possible. If we're just gonna say that, this needs to be looked at. That's helpful, but I think there's a million things in our ordinances that the council needs to look at. So I think if we're gonna pass something related to this, related to signs, related to use variances, I think it needs to be as specific as possible in a format that the council can handle expeditiously, so.
Isn't that what your subcommittee does?
Well, I was gonna say, you're leaving it up to.
I completely am on the other end of that. I think all we should be doing is pointing out areas that should be reviewed and looked at. I don't think we have enough time
Yeah,
to
I guess.
specifically change the sign bylaws or, you know, the transient lodging bylaws.
Sure, and so.
The parking, you know.
Right, if folks
bylaws.
feel strongly about, on this committee, feel strongly about certain topics related to each ordinance, you know, I think we should be as specific as possible, saying what we want looked at and what we want changed. Otherwise, you're leaving it up to myself, Councilor Munson, and Councilor DeMarco, with some work from KP, and then to be voted on by the entire council. So if there's something that we want, we need to say it.
Steve, just to put it more in perspective, if you look at proposal 3, this is more in the line of what you would receive, which would be red line edits.
Yep.
This is what it is now, we're suggesting striking this and
Yeah,
adding that.
exactly.
So the greater report that we're kind of in the midst of drafting here is much more robust than these 3 pages. It's closer to 20 pages.
Yeah.
It goes through each of these proposed changes where we are taking exception to specific language within an ordinance. We're actually going to provide it in a manner of, this is what it is now, this is what we're suggesting the
Right.
changes be.
Great. Perfect.
So that you can see that in very easily and clearly. There are some issues, as Tom's saying, though, that it's over and above, like the water strategic
Yeah,
advisory
no,
committee.
fair enough.
There's language in there of term limits that no person can be replaced, for example. That there might be a reason for that. We don't know what that reason is.
Totally
There should be
understand. Yep.
more public discourse on that.
I mean, I'll take something off, that's something unrelated, like, we have a zoning ordinance that says you can't park in your front yard.
Right.
And it makes no sense, because everybody in this room is probably parking in their front yard. You know, your front yard is only supposed to be from the front of your house to the street, from one property line to the other. Now, who parks in that area of their driveway?
Sure.
I do. I mean, everybody does. So how does that ordinance make any sense? What's the purpose of the ordinance? For us to rewrite that without the input of fire? So is it a safety issue? You know, is it like inspectional services? Ken brought that up. Like, they're the ones that are supposed to be enforcing these things. So what are they looking for when they, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think this committee has the time to get into that, to be able to rewrite the actual ordinance.
I get that, but if there are things that we want, we need to be specific about it, otherwise me, John, and Rob are gonna guess. So I think we need to be as direct as possible to with our recommendation, with the
But I would
guidelines
have
of
thought
it,
that
yeah.
committee, that subcommittee's role would be, okay, we have an issue with this ordinance, let's reach out and talk with fire, let's reach out and talk with
And
police.
that's what happens, right.
So that you
That's
can
what
make
happens.
an educated and appropriate
No, and that's what
change,
happens.
where I don't know that we're doing that, or can have the time to do that.
Yeah.
I think we can try to get close, but I agree, and especially with the water sewer thing, I don't wanna.
There is more
build-
due
I don't wanna
diligence
build
that needs
I
to
don't
happen
think we
at the
know.
council level.
Yeah.
I understand that entirely, but my point is, if folks feel passionate about something, we have to say it. We can't just kind of leave it open-ended that it needs to be looked at. The other quick point I want to make on this is that it's not just Airbnb anymore, it's VRBO, it's, front desk. There's a million of these companies, so I think that's one thing that we
I don't
need to-
think our ordinance actually has Airbnb.
No,
written
I
in it.
think it's,
It says
short-term
transient lodging,
or transient
short
lodging, right.
term, it says, and then there's a bed and breakfast section.
Right, and I do think a lot of folks here, or at least one person here, is stuck around this long to talk about it, so I think we should defer to the audience.
Yes, so anyone else on the committee want to be heard? Very good. Anyone in the live audience want to be heard?
Okay, moving on.
We adjourn.
Sure.
Can I ask a broader questions about whether it's called Airbnb, a bed and breakfast, or transient lodging? Do you all think that the original intention of that ordinance, which I think was to have people who were from Winthrop stay in Winthrop as they grew up here, that was its primary purpose, to help them stay here. Secondary was to improve tourism in Winthrop. Has that been met in the years, or is it just a business?
I don't think we've done enough to know what the legislative intent was of that ordinance. I think the real purpose of the ordinance is a safety measure, to make sure that the fire department's been in these houses, that there's fire smoke detectors where they're supposed to be, that there aren't kitchens in individual bedrooms, that there's a safety aspect there. I think that's the first and foremost basis of this ordinance was to license these establishments or these small businesses.
What you're saying, what you're asking, it's actually in the beginning of the ordinance.
Yeah.
And he has a point. That is one of the purposes for enacting this ordinance, was to be able for people who no longer have a use for a 7-bedroom house because their kids have all grown and gone, to not have to chop that up into a 2-family, to not, to afford to stay there, but to be able to do this. Okay, now, so that is part of the ordinance. It is written in there, but it's also to promote tourism and.
That's been met, to promote tourism?
Well, no, I don't. Has it been met? I mean, there's certainly an interest to meet it because there's so many illegal ones. The problem is.
My memory was that it wasn't so much like a person whose kids were grown and they moved out, but it was more like, hey, I grew up in Winthrop, I want to stay in Winthrop, but it's pretty expensive now, and I can't afford the mortgage. So let me become an Airbnb, and that way I can stay here. I think that was the primary intent. Secondary was the tourism business. So I asked, my question is, has that actually been met? Or is it really turned into just a money-making business that's got nothing to do with that? And the town in the first place, did it even have the power to say, no, we don't want any of this stuff here at all? Just no. Can the town even do that?
Well, the
towns have.
Identify himself.
I'm sorry.
Identify himself.
Oh, could you please identify yourself for the record?
Enzo Leone from Birch Rock.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
I had a couple of questions.
Will you identify yourself too, please? Again, I know you're different.
Well, Michael Fielding, same street. So, if there's a house that has a rental unit and is an Airbnb, and the Airbnb has a limitation of, say, 2 units, where does the rental unit come into play? Because is it a rental, is it an Airbnb, is it a hybrid?
So you're saying a 2-family, that one of the units is a rental and the other one is
Well,
an
I don't know if
Airbnb?
it's 2-family, but say there's a rental and then an Airbnb in the same building. Or what is it?
I can take, so again, getting back to like the purpose a little bit, was also that we saw Airbnbs popping up, and there was a lot of people in the neighborhood saying, what's going on? And so this ordinance was also tying that rental with an owner-occupied unit. That's what's in the books right now. So it wasn't, and we can debate whether we should allow somebody that has 2 units in a house to always just rent that 1 unit, but it literally, by the word of the law right now, is you're renting a bedroom in the unit that you're in.
If I have a
So
2-family.
if the zoning board says 2 rentals, you can't rent the rental unit because it's a 2-unit, a permit approved by the zoning board.
Correct. I mean,
And
unless,
that answers the question.
yes, I think
So the
yeah.
3rd unit can't be rented because they're prohibited from renting it with 3rd bedroom.
So you're calling the 3rd unit, but it's not a 3rd unit.
Well,
It's
whatever you
the
wanna call it.
rental unit. In order
Right,
for the
so-
rental unit.
So it's either an Airbnb or it's a rental
The
house.
rental unit would, the person of the rental unit wouldn't be able to do the Airbnb because they don't own it. Even though they may
No, I'm
occupy it,
talking
but they
about
don't own it.
overall. There's a rental unit in the building, plus an Airbnb.
So
And
the,
it's only
right
approved
now,
for the
the-
Airbnb.
the zoning
So
would-
the rental can't be rented, the rental unit
No,
can't be rented.
no, it could be if it's a legal rental. If I have a two-family house,
Well, that's what I was asking.
okay, if
Yeah,
I have a
that-
two-family
that's
house,
the answer,
I have a two-family house and I can rent the second unit. I can only Airbnb the unit I'm living in.
Yeah, that's exactly
You
correct.
follow me?
A bedroom in the.
A bedroom
Well, yeah,
unit.
that's what I'm saying.
So it
I
can be both.
It can be both in a legal
That was the question.
multi-unit.
All right.
But Tom's
And-
there, I mean, he's there policing
Well, I
it.
won't belabor the point, I just want to check that, and I wanted to speak to this fellow, I don't know your name. You said the hardship, version of the, zoning
Variance.
board's approval
The
of
use, yep.
use, which speaks to what Enzo talked about on the, Airbnb language in the beginning ordinance, where it would help people keep their house. Does that tie in?
No.
No, it
A,
doesn't tie in.
a variance is not required for an Airbnb. It's a special permit.
Oh, special permit.
That's,
Okay.
but the special permit does not require hardship. Hardship is specific language to variance.
Yeah, but the beginning of the Airbnb was put together to help for the hardship. I'm
No,
getting
you're
a
There's a
using
financial
hardship,
hardship.
there's a legal.
The hardship on a variance, if I may, the hardship on a variance has to deal with shape, topography, or soil conditions.
Okay.
Those are the only grounds for why the house might have to be in a
Oh,
different spot.
okay, one last thing, because I don't wanna keep everyone's tired, I bet.
It's not money.
So in your proposal, it doesn't say anything about people that live next to these Airbnbs or the neighborhoods. It's all about the businesses that aren't paying any taxes or fees to the town, finding ways to make them money, and ignoring the qualitative aspects of the neighborhood. There's not one mention of any neighbor, anybody that's affected by the Airbnbs, and you even have language about going from 2 to 4 rooms. So there's no representation there about the non-operators.
So I would
In
disagree.
your speech too, there was none.
I would disagree in that, one, as a preface, these are just issues that we're kind of throwing out there for discussion, but I think the off-street parking requirements would certainly be geared towards making sure the
I don't know
neighbors.
what off-street, does that mean they can
So
put
with
somebody
that-
out there with a permit?
with that-
Or does that mean restriction of
What
parking?
that could mean would be whether for somebody to rent a room to somebody with a car, that car needs to be parked in a driveway and not on the street.
But
So
you
that-
can't,
There's no enforcement for
can't
that,
do
you
that.
can't tell someone where to
Correct,
park a
but-
car.
The question was whether or not we were considering neighbors and things of that
Well, I'm
nature.
on a one-way street, and they don't enforce that, and it doesn't
you
make a
can't,
difference.
it's
and
a
there's-
public street,
Yeah,
it's a
exactly,
public street.
exactly. So, there's nothing there about the neighborhood, about
it?
the people that own properties next to these places.
That's the only, yeah, that's the only way the
There's no
town.
conversation that you had, any of you had, about how to serve the other people.
So how do we protect the neighbors? Tell us.
Yeah,
I'm not on that side of the, I'm not in that seat, but it needs to be part of your conversation.
Yep.
And it needs to be on your bullet points, there's not one bullet point about
How
that.
have you been negatively impacted by the Airbnb in your neighborhood?
I have one next to me, the house is, the driveway is 3 feet from my window. They rented it without being permitted, they over-rented it, and there was no consequences, they got a renewal. They had a Zoom meeting, which violated the open meeting because it came when Zoom wasn't even just beginning. I think they had 50,000 accounts in the whole country. So we got locked out of the meeting, even though the permit was denied in the beginning, and the appeal went to a Zoom meeting because that was canceled because of COVID. So it's been impacting me because there's a lot of traffic, and it's a one-way street, and there's no parking. I have grandchildren over all the time. I worry about who's coming in and out, because they are transient. The definition of a transient is temporary guest, and the antonym for that is permanent resident with a vested interest. So none of these bullet points are in any of your discussions, and they need to be. And to say to go from 2 to 4 rooms is crazy. So you want to put a hotel next to my house.
So you're against any expansion of them?
I didn't say I was against, there's 2 running now, and it's run right, but I don't want 4. They were trying to run 3.
What you're saying is you would be against moving it from 2 to 4.
Absolutely.
from the bedrooms. All right.
Absolutely. So you're gonna take a single-family house and essentially with the owner and then 4 guest rooms, make it a 5-family. You're rezoning it. And you're turning my neighborhood into a hotel. So there's gotta be some advocacy for
I would
it.
agree with that. I wasn't in favor of that.
You gotta have some advocacy for it.
Again, these are just things that were brought to us at the
I know,
last
but,
meeting.
you know, the town's not even getting any money. So who's getting all the money for all this? And my quality of life changes. I'm not gonna be denigrated at all and say it's a bad operation. I'm just gonna say it's not a neighborhood like it was.
You know,
I have strangers walking by my window 3-4 times a day in the dead of the night. You know, things like that.
Mhm.
It's effects. There's effects.
Do you think it's substantially detrimental to your neighborhood?
Yes. Yes. And my other neighbors think so too. They don't participate, but they do. One is here, I'm here, fellow across the street. I don't know the people in there. I can't say hello, I'll see you next week, I'll talk to you about your kids. They're not neighbors, they're transient.
Mhm.
And then that puts me in opposition with the neighbor that does own the house, which is not a good thing either. I don't want to be in opposition to him, he doesn't want to be in opposition to me, but he's trying to run a business in a residential neighborhood, and he got a special permit without an open meeting. And it's shame on the board for letting that happen. You had a Zoom meeting and nobody had Zoom. Nobody had Zoom.
the state.
So you had a
The
meeting.
state made it legal because of COVID.
That
They
doesn't
didn't do
mean,
it
that mean, doesn't
before.
mean the spirit of it was changed. That doesn't mean I got representation because the law said that.
The
I-
governor,
You're saying we violated it.
Yes.
We didn't violate it. It's allowed. It's been allowed since whenever, 20,
How come there was nobody on the meeting? You had a dozen people in the first meeting that opposed it, and nobody was on the Zoom meeting. It's because they didn't have the Zoom software. The company just began and it didn't even exist.
that's going backward. We're here not to try to enforce.
It's just a point being made if we're not getting representation. That's the point.
I gotta, please, say.
Can I just respond a little to
Yes.
that? Because I think one of the things we were talking about, and I'd like to get your take, is should we be trying to limit the amount of them in any given neighborhood or any given precinct or something? However, if we were to give, the problem is the illegal thing. We got to figure that out.
That would be just an opinion. I think you need more, like somebody said earlier, a public process that takes everyone into consideration.
Okay, yeah.
And there's some benefit from it. I'm not benefiting, you're not benefiting, the town's not benefiting that I can see. The trash is being used, there's no fees coming in. You have people coming in that nobody knows who they are. Uber's making money and people that are transporting them making money. So the only thing that's happening is I'm concerned all the time about who's coming in and out and I'm being disturbed.
Gotcha.
And what's the benefit?
Yeah, all right.
Yes.
Easy case, I'm just gonna do this real quick. Since the very beginning, we have gone through the entire process to get an Airbnb license, permit, and inspecting from day one, both properties. We have never bypassed any of the laws that were required to do it, ever. So, on speaking on behalf of him, his ignorance is not accurate, and it's adding to his confusion. But let's just move
Using
on.
the word ignorance is
But listen,
definitely
but
mud
we
that's
can-
not
but listen,
acceptable.
but here's what we can do, we can.
You listen too, though. We're gonna treat each other with respect. It's been a long night. Slow down. It's been a long night. We're gonna treat each other with respect.
we will.
We're not gonna throw mud.
No.
It's completely
With all
unacceptable.
due respect, it's very easy
That's
to
not an
make the
excuse.
case
With
where
all due respect, it's in cleaning anything.
we're gonna, it's very easy to stimulate the local economy. We're always gonna have people in this town that are gonna be for and against Airbnb. That's a given. People that are about you are gonna be for it or against it. That's no matter what. We can make a valid case that we have stimulated the economy. Gone to a deli, seafood, photography, any of the businesses like that. People have gone and spent their money in Winthrop. Even during COVID, we had people, and they went to those restaurants, even when they were locked down or they had requirements, spacing requirements. They came to Winthrop and spent the money. Easy case to make that we did stimulate the economy on a variety of fronts, number one. Number two, the town can definitely get some tax revenue if we get our state representatives, Lydia Edwards, involved, and Winthrop updates their tax code, the town of Winthrop can get substantial tax revenue. that the town could benefit for a variety of reasons, and you can allocate that money. So I will just say that, and just, the ordinance clearly says 4 bedrooms for a B&B. There should be no reason why you shouldn't have 4 bedrooms for an Airbnb, they're all one and the same. A B&B is now on the Airbnb platform, providing they meet the requirements and the criteria. Having opposition, you're always gonna have opposition, you're gonna have yays and nays. It's gonna be your recommendations, hopefully you don't just leave here tonight and say, we need to talk about this more and narrow it down. I agree with you, you need to find specifics and just pass them forward and vote on it and move forward. Don't say we need to look into this more, we need to look, because this is just a vicious circle that's going on and on and on. So please, at the end of tonight, talk amongst yourself and make specific recommendations, look at the ordinance, and find out what could be better and what could be worse. And move that forward.
We should just stop it altogether if we wanted to, the town, I mean.
I haven't done any research into whether or not Airbnbs can be.
Well, it's part of the ordinance, so you have to change the ordinance.
Okay, and can I continue?
Hold on, the committee's talking, you gotta,
Okay.
I know it's a blurred line
I
here,
know.
but we still. So the question was from the committee was, does the committee have the authority to recommend to the town council to eliminate the Airbnb ordinance, which would essentially either require a second ordinance that would ban essentially Airbnbs, or whether just the simple elimination of an Airbnb ordinance would be enough to prohibit Airbnbs. I think that's what your question was?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
And
but the
you
point
get-
is even if we did that, even if you eliminated them, the problem is we're not enforcing it now. So what is eliminating the ordinance gonna do?
Still gonna do it.
It just means that instead of having 300 illegal, we'll have 310 illegal, right? Because the 10 that are legal will just become illegal. If we're not gonna enforce it,
Well, you got people that are doing the right thing, and I'm just wondering if they know the people who aren't doing the wrong thing, and if we sit here and talk about removing it, maybe the people doing the right thing will start telling people to do the wrong thing, do the right thing.
But I
Because
think
we gotta get rid of it, because, pardon me,
You're right.
you're fine, you're doing what you're supposed to do, and you had your people go to these restaurant stuff, but clearly, it's not making up for the lost revenue we're seeing on the dozens and dozens of other ones who aren't following the rules.
Exactly.
But that's
Exactly.
got to do with you and the state, because the state's getting the money already.
But he's paying taxes on that revenue he's making.
Who is?
The revenue that I'm making, I'm paying income tax, and that money is going back to the state of Massachusetts. I would rather write a check for $20,000 for the town of Winthrop, but the town of Winthrop has not updated their tax code. In the very beginning of Airbnb in 2008, Airbnb used the narrative that, to win over lawmakers and legislators throughout the country, Airbnb used that narrative that different towns and states throughout the country, they should allow Airbnb because it would help somebody to stay in their home that's struggling with their mortgage, and it would provide them to stay in their home rather than being on the street and being homeless or evicted. So Airbnb used that narrative that some people are clinging to, because that's what they used 8 years ago at the infancy stages of Airbnb, to win over lawmakers across the nation that, yeah, we need Airbnb, you should approve it because you could help somebody stay in their home. As this evolved, now we're going into a decade into it, it has gone into much, much bigger. It's a much
I mean,
bigger.
there's communities that are building what you think are apartment buildings, but they are giant Airbnb. People are buying the units and renting them as Airbnb. That's what they're catering to. It's allowed in their condo
Effectively a
association.
hotel.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But how do we
It's-
address that
yeah.
change of use? So what I'm hearing here is that there's a substantial detriment to the neighborhood, that there are safety issues, that you don't know who's renting these, that these aren't neighbors in the traditional way that a neighbor would be, that you say, hello, Jimmy, how's Sally doing? Or something of that nature, that it's degrading and taking away from the fabric of what our neighborhood, we want our neighborhoods to be. So I'm hearing that, and what I want to hear from you is how can you address that? Does Airbnb, do they safeguard against registered sex offenders? Do they have safeguards against people with criminal backgrounds or something of that nature? What can you do and what have you done to make it so that the neighbors as a whole aren't being impacted by people coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning because they're flying in and they're getting dropped off and they've been on a plane all night partying? What can be done about that? And again, this is probably going a bit further than what this committee is here for, but we're down this rabbit hole. let's
Sure.
continue.
Okay, this was not a new topic, this is an old topic, and it's a concern for neighbors, like, I don't know who these people are, and what if they're terrorists and
I
all
think-
that.
yeah.
So, yeah, so Airbnb vets these people, you have to have an account, we have the authority to accept these people, whatever, you can look at their profile. It's not like you just let in this complete random stranger into your home, and you don't know if they're a pedophile or a terrorist.
But Ken, to your, I mean,
So,
our zoning ordinance does not, and maybe this is something that you want, we could change in the zoning. Our zoning ordinance does not require you to register with Airbnb, okay? You can get a transient license in Winthrop, you could put an ad in the airport
Craigslist.
and get, on Craigslist, anything,
yeah,
which isn't doing any of that vetting.
Right.
So maybe that's something else, but again, it all goes,
Yeah.
we're talking about the half a dozen that are legal. We have to
Right.
figure out a way to get the ones that are illegal. I mean, when you talk about the fabric of a neighborhood, why is the fabric of my neighborhood any more precious than the fabric of Steve's neighborhood?
Depends on who lives in the
The whole
neighborhood.
town is residential, right?
Well, that's just it.
Right,
And-
so if somebody on the beach wants to do, well, how can we zone it in one area and not somewhere else when the whole town is residential?
Well, that's the whole problem. So what I think the question is, does any resident in the town want to wake up and find out that their direct abutter is operating essentially a rooming house? I mean, whether it's through Airbnb or whether it's through Craigslist, it's still taking away a residential, single-family use, and it's varying it, and it's making it somewhere where there's different people coming in.
So the recommendation this board should make then to the council is that the council puts it to the town whether or not the town wants these.
Yeah, it's like the
Right,
marijuana
because
establishment,
that never
up or
happened.
down.
Right, there was discussion about it, there was public meeting about it,
Right.
but if you really wanna figure out whether or not this is right for this town or this town, and you wanna get voter turnout, I bet you that vote.
But then
Jim,
you have
that's
to-
the one you.
What about renting out to flight attendants and students? Because now we have real B&Bs in this town, and are you gonna exclude them, a B&B, or you got, or people that rent out to flight attendants and students, I house students, are they gonna be included, but the rest of the town's gonna be excluded?
Well,
So
it'll
where
be
you gotta make sure you make that differential
Yeah,
between.
the B and Bs and the transient lodging
Okay.
are its own ordinance.
Right.
When people take in
Students.
students,
Flight
those are
attendants.
long-term, well, not flight attendants
Flight-
would be transient lodging,
Okay.
but students would be long-term because they're here for six
Some of that's
plus months.
crash fans too, though.
Yeah.
They'd rent an apartment long-term and multiple people use it, so
It
it's
should be
a little
noted
bit.
that, it should be noted that hospitality, hotels are included in the same conversation as these other Airbnbs.
Yeah.
It should
Right.
also be noted that Lydia Edwards has written a fairly new piece of legislation about this topic and made us look at our own as antiquated. She did say that it needs to be updated in quite a bit. She actually went as far as explaining to me, and I won't say that I pretend to know the whole rules. I haven't read either, so I can't say it. She did say a couple of points that I think are worth noting. She doesn't make the individual go to Winthrop or East Boston or Boston in her case. She doesn't make the individual Airbnb renter or person that has the Airbnb pay. She makes Airbnb itself, the actual company, organization, be accountable for all of its units. So if they haven't come to Winthrop and registered that unit, it's no longer viable in the town, and now it's not able to actually allow any of the Airbnbs viable. So in other words, they're making the larger institutions, the VRBOs, the Airbnbs, accountable to their business. And
Yeah, so this is her idea.
No, it's already implemented. And then, I'll also go,
How
I mean,
could it
I
be?
can't,
It's their business.
And I think it's an interesting question, though, of whether or not the town should have an opportunity to vote as a population of whether or not Airbnb should be allowed in the town.
Of course, it will come through because so many illegals are there. They're gonna vote yes.
Maybe.
We don't know that necessarily.
That's not.
I don't have, I'm not on one side or the other, I'm really not, but I do,
But I
I don't know.
I think the vote would definitely come to the positive, would be approved.
To continue on the rabbit hole, though, if
That do it.
if
The town
the,
realizes the tax
quite a rabbit
revenue
hole.
they get what they-
Yeah.
they
That's
approve.
the
no, but if,
If the
even
town
if
can
the,
get a figure narrowed
Yeah,
down,
it's
how
on
much they would
27.
gain from the Airbnbs, it'll get approved. If they can realize tax revenue. When we're struggling with tax deficits to the town council and budget deficits, and they realize the tax revenue they can generate from Airbnb,
Oh,
it's like a no,
100%.
that would be like a no-brainer.
Well,
They would find me a town in a city across America and say, no Airbnbs.
Next up, Todd's up next.
I could actually say to you that Fort Lauderdale
Okay.
is considering it, because I stay in.
That's all hotels.
Well, that's okay, but I stay in an Airbnb in, what's that, Lauderdale area, it's a small section of
Wilton
Lauderdale.
Manors,
No, it's more, it's got restaurants
So
down there.
Todd, I'll
they
go
move
one
up,
step better than
And they wanna get rid of them. And they
North
wanna-
Conway tried to get rid of them,
Yeah,
okay, because there was no housing for the people that come to work there.
right.
So the businesses could not fill positions for during the season, because there's no place for these people to live, because nobody would want to rent those, they want to rent them to Airbnb. And they tried to take that away, and the judge said no. It went to court.
You're in North Conway, that's a little bit different than.
Still, the point is they found it not illegal.
We're on the ocean, we've had 40, I mean, you don't know the history of this town if you don't look at some of these old postcards and see that this town was hospitality, was where people came to
It's not anymore.
vacation. And that's just because we've gone through transformation, and you can't look at what is now and say that's what it should be. I just think that, you can put it to a vote, it doesn't matter what I think, but I also want you to know that
It
it's
does
just-
matter, but.
It also matters that there is, the things that matter and you can control, is if you do go through the specific companies, you can actually make them accountable. Also, you can control the number of parking spots per unit, and that affects all residential. So I think anytime that someone applies for that, it should be so that the neighbors and abutters aren't impacted in a way that's so negative that they don't want them around.
Well, that was my concern with the parking, and that was the thought that, if you have a two-family house that you want to turn into condos, you have to have 2 parking spots for each unit, 4 off-street parking. How is Airbnb any different? So if somebody comes in and says, I want to rent out these 2 rooms, why wouldn't you have to show that you have 2 off-street parking? Now, the flip side of that is, well, a lot of these folks are coming in and they're flying in and taking an Uber and they don't have any cars.
So the first problem to that is the way our zoning is written, because it only says you need to show that you have parking for that. It doesn't say you need to show you have the required parking for your unit plus additional parking for the number of guests you're allowed to have. It doesn't say that.
And maybe that's what we,
That's one of the problems that, as a board that has to review these and approve these, no one's ever answered that question. I mean, we all have our own opinion on how it should be done.
So maybe that's a step where parking requirements or off-street parking requirements could be a part of a legal Airbnb, so that residents like this is saying, well, I don't know who's parking in front of the house.
No, that's a whole nother problem. They're parking in the driveway. The problem is the driveway's too close to his house. That's a different, that's not an
Airbnb
Right.
issue, that's just an issue.
And even if they have the parking, who's gonna enforce that they have to use the parking?
Yeah.
Right?
have that all the time.
Anyone
We
can
have
drive
parking
into
spots
town
and
and
they
park
don't
on the
park.
street. You
Don't we
don't have
stickers
a,
in Winthrop?
Not over.
Not over.
not overnight. That's the only key. But you have a sticker, you have a guest sticker.
Guest pass.
There's nothing in our zoning saying he can't use his guest sticker for a guest.
I'm gonna try to move this conversation a bit along. I think we've gotten a good amount here. Yes.
Can I make a suggestion that
We're
you
gonna start here,
have
then
a
here.
separate public hearing on Airbnbs? And that way, you can do your research that you need to do, the people who want it, the people who don't want it.
I think-
You have a public meeting and you take care of it.
I think you make a good point, and I do think it's probably something over than what this ORC has been convened to accomplish and set out to do. And I do think it's a good point, and I think it's one that next week when we're talking will probably be, could be the direction that we go in. But I do think that this is a much more compact issue, and we're here to do, and we're not gonna certainly resolve it tonight. So I do think that, on the Airbnb issue, we need to kinda examine this a little bit closer. Not so much this board, but as a board, as a town council. I wish a couple of our town councils didn't just leave, but that's something that they should really be possibly looking at.
Just a
Yes.
quick question, where can I get a copy of the ordinance or the bylaw for the Airbnbs, the official copy as it's
So
written right now?
If you
And
go
who
on,
drafted the copy?
if you Google Winthrop Muni Code, MUNICODE, all of the updated ordinances in the charter is located on that site. Winthrop uses that as a kind of a vendor to manage their site. And,
I have a suggestion. If you want to give me your email.
perfect.
Let's give it to them.
The official record
Or
keeper
that.
of the town is in the room, is in the room.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm the one that actually lives next door to this man, and I live across the street from that other man. And in the 2.5, almost 3 years I've lived in that house, neither one of them have ever said hello, goodbye, or anything to me. I have guests going out, in and out, they say hello to them, he's always out on his porch or in his yard or whatever, and he don't even respond to them. So, for him to say, oh, nobody said hello, and I don't know who's there, and everybody that comes to the door, we know.
I think we're looking, you're talking more about the micro problem of what you're actually dealing with and living with. We're looking at more of the macro solutions to these problems,
Well,
so.
the background, but that may be, but you're taking into account somebody's life is detrimental because there's an Airbnb, a house next to them.
People's home is the largest asset that most humans ever
Could you
attain.
identify yourself, please? Yes.
Yes, could you please identify yourself for the record?
Oh, Shirley Goodwin, 45 Birch Road.
Shirley, I apologize, but Ken and just came to me, said they're gonna live there. I said, hope you'd be happy there.
All
I
right.
gave them 2 rocking chairs for their porch.
All
They
right.
totally fooled me. They didn't tell me they're gonna start being.
I'm gonna try to take some more order back. Anyone
All right,
on
this
Zoom
is
that has anything new to add to this discussion?
Can I ask, how many licensed B&Bs are there in the town?
10.
Thank you.
Like,
Thank you.
Hit the green
Yeah,
button.
hit the green button on the wall.
On your left, don't you want to stay?
there's 10 licensed,
Yeah.
And there's
so the other
probably 40
90
of
plus
them.
are not licensed or whatever.
It's probably 50 or 60.
Again, it's an enforcement issue first and foremost.
So I'd like to touch on one more thing. I think given our time constraint of submitting this to the town council, we are not gonna be able to do anything about this.
I would agree.
There is no way, because we're limited, we're beyond what actually, we got approval for 6 months, and we're right at the very end. For us to spend more time looking into this, yeah, maybe we can send some bullet points to the ordinance, committee.
We could send a recommendation that they look at it, is what we could,
Yeah,
what we
We
could
could
do.
send a recommendation to the town council of several ordinances that we want them to look at.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think this would fit under one of
Look
them.
at.
And I think it'd be
Right, that's
fair
the
to
easiest
give our
thing to do.
bullet points and the feedback that's come back that we've gotten so far.
Right.
I would
For
agree.
us to sit there and try and dig more information out about, we don't have time to
Because
do
on
that.
each
'cause we
ordinance
still have to
sent will be a public hearing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
Yeah.
So moving on, does anyone have any public comment on any proposals that were not included on here that they would like to be heard on?
There's a hand up on Zoom and
Yeah. Just,
we're still kicking on the Zoom.
Yeah, I had my hand up on Zoom for
Yep.
some time.
you on?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm not gonna mention, all of the, I could be here all night if I mentioned all the things I wanted to mention, but.
Well, you got
my
3 minutes and
main-
54 seconds. so-
I can do it, and I can do it in 2. What I want to know is why, it's an enforcement issue, so while we discuss these issues, nothing is being done, and the people that are trying to follow the law are being penalized, and those that are illegal are still up online and doing what they wanna do. That's my issue, that's why are being penalized, and the ones that are not are getting away with it.
Well said.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that could happen today, right? Like town council could, tell
Call your
the
council.
town manager to like, hey, point some resources towards cleaning up that, right? And then we can have a longer conversation about whether we really want
Larger
it.
fines,
and
et
all that.
cetera, yep.
Yeah, okay. But
All right.
Great point, thank you.
Any other issues that the public would like to bring to this board's attention? Any other issues?
No, just a final comment, if I can.
If it's on Airbnb, I'm gonna respectfully ask you to, I
No,
think
these people have sat here all night.
all right,
Okay, thank you.
thank
Our
Karen.
hotel, thank you very much for that. This is if you have this vote, you're gonna realize that hotels, like John said, are now on the Airbnb platform, like the Winthrop Arms is on the Airbnb platform. If someone's looking for a hotel, David, he has those rooms listed on Airbnb. So if you're gonna eliminate Airbnb, now you're actually affecting hotels and real B&Bs, because they're using that platform as an outreach, because they know that's what works. So this is gonna go really, really deep. We have this vote, no more Airbnbs. I mean, you're gonna allow a hotel to be on Airbnb, because they're gonna use that platform?
Well, hotel is in a zone use.
I think this is,
No?
it's not the same argument.
It's not the same argument,
It's
but
like saying that they can't advertise.
I'm talking from a legal aspect. You're gonna eliminate Airbnb people in their homes, but you're gonna allow Airbnb to run in hotels. In a legal aspect, is the town gonna be able to legally do that?
Yes.
It's not an Airbnb if it's a hotel, it's a hotel.
No, it's listed, it's on Airbnb.
A hotel is zoned.
Their property is
A
zoned.
hotel is zoned to be a hotel.
Okay,
It's
okay.
different. It's
Oh,
not
and a
the
B&B.
same.
Airbnb is
What's a
taking an
B&B? What's a
unpermitted
B&B?
use.
And breakfast.
Right.
Okay, and if it's
And
on,
that's
and if it's on the Airbnb platform, that's still,
Well, when we talk about transient lodging.
right, okay, so that's what I'm
It's
saying.
the same zoning.
Right, okay, Okay.
There's some different
language.
language in it, but they're in the same zone.
Okay,
I would say, you had a list you had come.
what's that?
Don't invite more.
I stay here, this is.
Nice.
Jeannie Maggio.
Yes, Mrs. Maggio had a list of items.
I'm gonna give these out
All
to
right.
you.
You don't wanna discuss it? It's only 10 o'clock.
I already did, most of it.
Any other further discussion
Make
here?
a motion to adjourn.
Very nice. Motion adjourned made by the Peanut Gallery, seconded by Denise. All those in favor? Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Nothing was